What's up everyone? You're here at Eclipse Wizardry. We're dropping something epic today. Every Veela Elder tried to break Harry's bond age 9 and his ancient magic refused to yield to anyone. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The sanctuary finds him. The rain had been falling for 3 hours by the time Harry stopped running. He didn't choose the spot deliberately, his legs just gave out, the way legs do when you've been going on nothing but adrenaline and the sick need to get away, and he went down hard in the heather, one knee cracking against a stone he hadn't seen in the dark. He bit down on the sound before it could become anything embarrassing and lay there for a moment with his cheek against the wet ground, listening to thunder rolling off the mountains in long, lazy waves. The Dursleys' holiday cottage was at least 4 miles back. Maybe 5. He'd stopped counting after the second mile because counting made it feel smaller than it was, and he needed it to feel enormous right now. He needed the distance. His right eye was swelling shut. It wasn't the worst it had ever been, which was the sort of thought that would have horrified anyone who didn't know the Dursleys, and which Harry accepted with the flat practicality of a child who has learned not to waste energy on things he can't change. Vernon had been drinking since noon. The Scottish rain put him in black moods always. Harry had clocked this pattern over the 2 previous summer trips, the way the grey low skies seemed to compress something inside his uncle until the pressure became a direction, and that direction was usually Harry. Today it had been a broken television remote. Yesterday it had been the look on Harry's face at breakfast. 3 days ago, it had been nothing at all, which was honestly the most exhausting kind because at least with a stated reason you knew what story you were in. Harry had bolted out the back door when the first chair went over. He'd learned the window between Vernon deciding and Vernon reaching was about 3 seconds, and if you weren't gone in 2, you found out what the third felt like. He'd made it in 1.5, which he privately considered one of his better performances. He sat up in the heather now. The rain came down cold and specific, not the grey drizzle of Surrey but something older, more deliberate, like the Highlands were reminding you personally that they had been here before your kind and would be here after. The mountains were black shapes against a slightly less black sky. His glasses were cracked, left lens intact, right lens spiderwebbed from when they'd caught the edge of the doorframe, and through the good lens he could see the stand of Scots pines that shouldn't have been there. The tourist pamphlet Dudley had crumpled and thrown at him on the drive up had shown this stretch of hillside as open moorland. No trees. But the pines were there, very definitely there, old enough that their roots had lifted out of the ground in gnarled arches, and between them, through them, something was glowing. Harry looked at the glow. Then he looked back toward where the cottage was, 4 or 5 miles of wet dark moorland, Vernon probably still up, the odds not good. He turned back to the light and walked toward it. The bracken between the pines caught at his ankles, and the rain changed character the moment he stepped between the first 2 trunks, still audible, pattering against the needles above him, but not reaching him the same way, like passing through gauze. The air smelled different too. Less peat and cold stone, more something he couldn't name, sweeter and more complex, like the inside of a very old house where good things had been made for a long time. The light came from a fire. He stopped at the tree line and took stock. A cluster of low stone buildings arranged around a central clearing. The fire burning at the center of it with absolutely no concern for the weather, no shelter over it, no windbreak, just the flame existing with a confidence that suggested it had arrangements with the rain he didn't know about. Around it, people. Women, mostly. He counted 9, then spotted 2 more at the edges. They wore practical clothes, old-looking without being costumes, and they were doing something, not quite talking, more a rhythm of sound too low to make out individual words, something that made the back of Harry's skull feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. He would have stayed where he was. He'd learned to assess first, move second, and staying hidden was one of the genuinely transferable skills his life in the cupboard had given him. But the bracken to his left exploded with the sound of something much larger than its size, and a small girl sat down very hard in the undergrowth with her dress comprehensively caught on a thorn bush and her expression the specific betrayed fury of someone who considers this a personal affront. She was maybe 7 years old. Her hair was silver white, plastered dark with rain, and her eyes, when she looked up at him, were a color he didn't have a word for. Not blue, not gray, not silver. Lit from inside by something that had nothing to do with the fire across the clearing. She registered his presence, registered the grin he was trying and failing to suppress, and said with precise English and an accent shaped somewhere across the channel, "Do not laugh." "I wasn't going to," Harry said. "Everyone laughs. I literally just appeared here. I didn't have time." She considered this, accepted its logic, and looked back down at the thorn bush with a furious pragmatism. Her dress was white, or had been, embroidered flowers along the hem losing a determined battle against the muddy ground, and the bush had a proper grip on the fabric at two separate points, the way thorn bushes do when they've decided to be thorough about it. "Hold still," Harry said, and crouched down. He worked the fabric free the way he'd learned with Aunt Petunia's rose netting, methodical, slow, working backward from the tightest snag to the outer ones, not pulling. The girl watched him with the focused attention of someone who has decided to reserve judgment. He got the second snag free and she was out of the bush with her dignity largely intact. "You are bleeding," she said. He'd cut his palm on a stone somewhere in the heather, hadn't noticed until now. "Yeah." She looked at his eye. "That is bad." "I know. You should have a healer." "I'm fine." She looked at him the way people look at someone who has said something both true and insufficient. "I am Gabrielle," she said. "You should not be here." "I know. I'm Harry." "The ward did not stop you." "What's a ward?" Gabrielle opened her mouth, then apparently decided this was above her pay grade, turned toward the clearing, and shouted something in rapid French. Harry caught none of it, but it produced immediate results. Two women broke from the fire at a pace that covered ground with unsettling efficiency, and behind them, more slowly, a girl about his age who walked the way some people do when they want very badly to run but have decided it isn't done. She had the same silver-white hair as Gabrielle, worn loose down her back, and the same quality to her eyes, that lit from inside, no good word for it color. She was taller than Harry, which wasn't difficult, and she was angry in the specific way of someone who has been pulled away from something important by family-related chaos and is managing the irritation with limited success. She said, "Gabrielle. You were supposed to be inside." "I was looking for the fox," Gabrielle said, with the tone of someone offering a complete and satisfactory explanation. "There is no," the older girl stopped. She had seen Harry. Her eyes moved from his face to his hand to the thorn bush and back to his face, fast and clinical. "Who are you?" "Harry." The swelling around his eye was getting worse, he had to narrow the other one more than usual to see clearly. "I followed a light. I know I shouldn't be here. I'll go." "You cannot go," one of the women said. She'd stopped 3 feet away and was looking at him with an expression he couldn't decode, not hostile, not afraid. Still, the way people are still when something has surprised them that they didn't think could still surprise them. "You came through the ward." "I didn't do it on purpose," Harry said. "How you mean to do things," the older girl said, and it had the texture of something recently learned, tested for truth mid-sentence, is not always relevant. Then, to Harry directly, as if the practicalities were more immediately pressing than the philosophy, "Sit down. You look like you're about to fall over." He didn't argue. Partly because she was right, and partly because arguing with someone when they're being genuinely helpful felt wasteful. He sat on a tree root and the woman, Genevieve, the older girl translated, Apollin's cousin, crouched in front of him and examined his eye with a focused, clinical attention that was not unkind. "She says the bone is not broken," the older girl reported, listening to Genevieve's French. "The swelling is bad but it will ease." "Good. I am Fleur," the older girl said. She had positioned herself against the nearest pine with her arms crossed, and she hadn't left, which Harry noted. "Fleur Delacour." "Fleur Delacour," Gabrielle confirmed, as though there might have been ambiguity. "Yes, Gabrielle, he can hear the whole name. Genevieve pressed 2 fingers lightly against his eye socket and said a word under her breath that he couldn't catch, and something cool moved through the swelling like stepping into shade. Not a spell he knew, he didn't know any spells, but the worst of the throb eased, and his right eye opened a fraction more than it had managed in the last hour. "What is this place?" Harry said. The small silence that followed had a shape to it, not alarmed, more like the pause before answering a question where the answer is both simple and complicated. "A sanctuary," Fleur said. "For our people." A beat. "Humans do not usually find it." "I'm human." "Yes," she said. "That is what is strange." They took him to a building near the edge of the clearing, separate from the main fire, low-ceilinged with a banked hearth that radiated a dry, steady heat. Genevieve cleaned his palm with something that stung briefly and then didn't, and produced bread and cheese and tea from a sideboard with the focused efficiency of someone who considers feeding people a form of problem-solving. Gabrielle occupied the corner and watched everything with the insatiable attention of a child who understands she is seeing something unusual and will not be moved from it by any force short of actual sleep. Fleur stood in the doorway. Not inside, not outside. Present. She was doing that thing. Harry had seen it in himself, actually, in the window of the cupboard at Privet Drive, standing on the safe side of a threshold, where you stay close enough to a thing to know what's happening without committing to being inside it. "Your family," she said, without turning around. "Did they do this to you?" Harry looked at Genevieve's patient, deliberately incurious expression. She was not listening, or performing not listening well enough that the distinction didn't matter. "My uncle had a bad night," Harry said. "That is not an answer." "It's the one I've got." Fleur turned then, and looked at him with the directness that he would come to understand was not rudeness but honesty operating without its social filter. She held his gaze for a moment, and he held hers, and something passed between them that was not the bond, that came later, but was the first brick of something. A mutual recognition. 2 people who had both learned, through different routes, that the truth said plainly was better than the comfortable lie. She turned back to the doorway. "You can stay tonight," she said. "Until the storm passes." "Fleur," Genevieve said, something careful in the tone. "He came through the ward," Fleur said. "That question is already answered. The next question is what we do about it." She said it like someone closing a case file, not harshly, just with a specificity that left little room for the sentiment to wander. Harry ate the bread and cheese and drank the tea and let the warmth of the hearth work on the cold that had settled deep in his bones over the 4-mile run. He thought about the walk back to the cottage, about Vernon's patterns, about the odds of the kitchen being empty by 3 in the morning. He thought about the ward, whatever that was, and why he'd walked through it when apparently that wasn't supposed to happen. He thought about the way Fleur had said our people and humans do not usually, with that careful line drawn between categories, and decided he was too tired right now to fully explore what that line meant. He slept. Or nearly slept, that half place where you are too tired to think properly but too aware to be truly under. Gabrielle's breathing had deepened and slowed in the corner. Genevieve had stepped outside, murmuring something about checking the younger children. The fire had settled to deep red coals. Fleur had finally come inside and was sitting across the room, knees up, reading something, or trying to. She kept looking up and then down again, like the page couldn't hold her attention tonight. The ley line shifted at midnight. Harry surfaced from the half-sleep into full alert, because the shift was not subtle. The air changed. Not temperature, the room was still warm, but pressure, the way the air changes in the instant before lightning, charged and intentional, full of a weighting that had mass. He sat up. Fleur was on her feet. She hadn't planned to be, he could see it in the way she'd stumbled getting upright, her book on the floor. She stood with her hands held slightly away from her sides, palms forward, and her face was doing something complicated and involuntary, like a person bracing against wind on a cliff and trying not to look like they're bracing. "What?" Harry started. The floor lit up. A line of light ran through the stone beneath his feet, silver and gold braided together, moving, living, tracing a course from the wall behind him across to the wall behind Fleur and then up through her. He could only see it from the corner of his eye, the way you can sometimes see faint stars better by not looking directly at them. He felt it in his feet before he saw it, a warmth in the stone, then in his soles, then moving up through him, and his magic came up to meet it. He'd always known he had magic. Things happened around him, the roof of the school when he'd been running from Dudley's gang, the inexplicable haircut, the glass vanishing at the zoo and the snake looking at him with the specific quality of someone who'd been waiting for someone to bother to look back. He'd never controlled it. He'd never tried to, not really, it happened when it happened and he'd learned to act like it hadn't. But this was different. This was his magic responding to something, reaching, moving toward the current in the floor the way a flame reaches toward oxygen, natural, immediate, without asking his permission. The light in Fleur went sideways, toward him. The light in him went toward her. They met in the middle of the room somewhere between their chests, not visible exactly, felt more than seen, a connection made the way a key connects to a lock, the sense of something aligning that had always been shaped to align, and then the instant of the bolt turning. Then it was done. The floor was just floor. The air was just air. The fire was just coals. Fleur stared at him. Harry stared back. That, she said, with a precision that bordered on clinical, was not supposed to happen. What was it? A ley line. She was pressing both hands flat against her sternum in a gesture that was entirely involuntary, her fingers spread, checking for something. They run beneath the sanctuary. The elders built here because of them, they amplify our magic, they power the ward, they're why this place is. She stopped. Do you feel it? He put his hand on his chest. There was something there. A weight, a warmth, a presence, subtle enough that he might have explained it away if she hadn't asked, but now that she'd asked it was undeniable. Like knowing there was someone in the next room even with the door closed. Like standing somewhere and suddenly knowing, without evidence, that this was where you were supposed to be. Yeah, he said. What is it? Fleur's face had gone carefully controlled. Not frightened, she didn't strike him as someone who frightened easily, but intensely occupied, running calculations he couldn't see. I need to get my mother, she said. She was out the door before he could respond, moving at a pace just below running, and Harry sat with sleeping Gabrielle and the banked fire and the strange new weight in his chest and assessed his situation. He was, objectively, in a magical sanctuary he shouldn't have been able to find, connected to a girl he'd met 90 minutes ago by something neither of them could undo, about to encounter an unknown number of powerful magical women who had not consented to his presence. He had survived the Dursleys for 9 years by accurately assessing situations and not catastrophizing them. He applied this principle now. The situation was unusual. He was not dead. He was warm, which was an improvement on an hour ago. He would wait and see what happened next. Fleur Delacour arrived in under 5 minutes and she came fast. She was taller than Fleur, the same silver-white hair worn in a braid, and she had the quality Harry had noticed in certain teachers and shop owners and other adults who were very good at what they did, the sense of someone who occupied their own authority completely, no performance, just presence. She'd been woken. Her braid was slightly undone at the end and her expression had the tautness of someone managing a sharp feeling very close to the surface. Her eyes found Harry and took him apart efficiently, put him back together, reached some interim conclusion. You came through the ward, she said. I keep getting told that. Her mouth pressed. Not anger at him, he read, at the situation. You have no magical training. No. But you have magic. Things happen. I don't control it. He paused. I didn't control what just happened, either, if that matters. It matters that you understand that, she said, which was a more considered answer than he'd expected. She looked at Fleur, who had positioned herself in the doorway, back at the threshold again. Harry noticed. Show me. Fleur hesitated for only a second. Then she held out one hand, palm up. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. Something in his chest moved without his instruction, the bond recognizing what was being asked, and he mirrored her without entirely knowing why, his own palm up, the air between them suddenly attentive. A thread of light, silver gold, connected their hands for the space of 2 heartbeats. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just present, and true, and clearly not going anywhere. Apollon looked at that light for a long time. Then she sat down on the vacated bench, put her face in both hands, and said something in French that was either a prayer or a profanity and possibly both. "What is it?" Harry said. "A soul bond," she said, from behind her hands. Harry waited. The words meant nothing to him yet but clearly meant a great deal to everyone else in the room, so he gave them the silence they apparently required. "It is," Fleur said, from the doorway, with the terrifying composure of someone holding something very large in place through sheer force of will, the most sacred and irreversible magical connection in our people's entire recorded history. Which has apparently just formed itself between me and a 9-year-old boy I have never met, in a sanctuary he should not have been able to find, activated by a ley line that has not moved in 40 years, on a Wednesday, Harry said. "It's past midnight." Fleur stopped. Harry said, "Sorry." "That was, no," Fleur said. Her voice was slightly strange. It was not helpful. But it was. She stopped again. Made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was its immediate neighbor. "No. It was not helpful." Apollon raised her head from her hands. Her expression had reorganized itself, the sharp feeling still present underneath but managed now, put in order, the way a good sailor manages a bad sea, with respect and without panic. She looked at Harry the way people sometimes do when they are seeing someone rather than what that someone represents, and Harry, who was used to being seen as a problem, a burden, an inconvenience, a reminder of things people didn't want to remember, sat still under the scrutiny and let her look. The boy with the cracked glasses. The swollen eye. The cut palm. The tea mug held in both hands. 9 years old and not frightened of her, which she clearly found unusual. "The elders must be told tonight," she said. "Before morning. If they find out another way it will be worse." She stood up. "Both of you stay here." She looked at Harry once more, the look of a woman revising an assessment mid-revision and not yet sure where it would land. "I am not angry with you," she said, carefully. "I want you to understand that." "Okay," Harry said. "I am angry at the situation." "That seems fair." She held his gaze for another moment, and then she left, and the night settled back over the little building, and the coals settled lower, and Gabrielle slept on through all of it with the complete serenity of someone who has decided that whatever the adults are doing, it's their problem. Fleur came fully inside and sat on the floor with her back against the wall, her knees up, her sister's sleeping form naturally gravitating into her lap the way younger siblings do, seeking warmth without waking. Harry sat across from her, back against the opposite wall, and they looked at each other across the dim room with the shared and slightly shell-shocked understanding of two people for whom the same enormous strange thing has just happened, and neither of whom has the vocabulary for it yet. "Does it hurt?" Harry asked. "The bond." "No," she said. "It is like knowing someone is in the other room. Knowing without needing to check." "Yeah. You feel it too." "Yeah." She picked at the embroidered hem of her sleeve, a nervous gesture she probably didn't know she was making. "I don't know what I'm meant to do with this." "Me either." A pause. "I don't know anything about your kind. Whatever this place is. I don't go to magic school. I don't know any other magic people. I just knew things happen sometimes and that my aunt calls it abnormal." Fleur looked at him steadily. "In 2 years you would be 11. You would get a letter from a school called Hogwarts. Every magical person in Britain gets one. Would I have gotten one?" Even living with, he stopped. Living with people who call your magic abnormal? Yeah. Yes, she said. The letter finds you regardless. It is how it works. She paused. You did not know this. I didn't know most of it. She was quiet for a moment, doing something private and internal. Then, where are your parents? Dead. He said it the way he always said it, flat, quick, the way you say something you have said so many times the emotion has been filed down to a point. Car accident. When I was 1. She didn't immediately respond, which was unusual. Most people said I'm sorry with a speed that suggested they mostly wanted to move past the subject. Fleur looked at him with those strange lit eyes and said, very precisely, car accident. It wasn't a question. It was the tone of someone who has heard a sentence and located something inside it that doesn't sit right. That's what I was told, Harry said, and heard, for the first time in his own voice, the texture he'd always suppressed, the awareness that the story had gaps, edges that didn't quite meet. Fleur held his gaze for a moment more. Then she looked down at Gabrielle and adjusted the angle of her sleeping sister's head against her leg, a gentle, habitual gesture, and said nothing further about it. You are not afraid, she said, after a while. Of any of this? Harry thought about that honestly. A little. But I'm tired enough that it's not as loud as it would be otherwise. That sound again, almost a laugh, surprised out of her by the honesty. That, she said, is possibly the most useful thing anyone has said tonight. High bar. Yes, she said dryly. It has been a very low bar of a night. They sat in the quiet of the small building, fire low, rain gone now, just the Highland silence outside, which was not empty but full of wind moving over old ground. The kind of silence that is comfortable rather than awkward, the kind that two people can occupy without either of them needing to fill it, which is rarer than it sounds and tends to indicate something about compatibility of character. What will the elders do? Harry said. They will try to break the bond, Fleur said. Straightforwardly, not softening it. That is what Maman meant when she said to tell them before morning. Elder Severin will want to move quickly, before it sets deeper. Can they do it? Fleur looked at the middle distance. They are the most powerful Veela magical practitioners alive. Collectively, they have attempted and succeeded in severing bonds before. She paused. Weaker ones. Newer ones. Is this one weak? No, she said, with the directness of someone reporting a fact rather than offering comfort. It is not. Harry put his hand on his chest again, over the presence there, the warm architectural weight. He had the same intuition he'd had earlier, clearer now, that the bond was not a layer added on top of something, but part of the structure underneath. Cutting it would not leave him intact -1 bond. It would leave him with something missing that had always been there, that he hadn't known was there until an hour ago, and that now felt as natural and necessary as anything he could name. All right, he said. All right? Fleur said, giving him the look she'd probably give someone who'd announced they were comfortable swimming with sharks. They're going to try what they're going to try at dawn. Being more worried about it between now and then doesn't change anything. She stared at him for a long moment. You are a very strange person, she said, and it was delivered as simple observation rather than judgment. I've had a strange night. You have had a strange life, she said, and it landed without cruelty, clinical, honest, the truth said plainly because she didn't know how else to say it. He looked at her. She looked at him. And there was something in that exchange that was the bond and also was not the bond, was older than the bond, something that would have been there even on a different night, even without a ley line, even if the thorn bush had never caught her sister's dress. A recognition. Two people whose instincts matched in a way that didn't need to be explained. Get some sleep, she said. If they are going to attempt something at dawn, you should be rested. What about you? She looked down at Gabrielle. I will sleep when she moves. A pause. She always moves eventually. Harry lay back down on the bench, pulled the rough blanket Genevieve had left over him, and looked at the ceiling. The stone was old, very old, he thought, older than any building he'd been in. The kind of old that had accumulated something, not weight exactly but depth, like certain people have when they have lived through enough that their presence alone carries history. "Fleur," he said. Thank you. For not making me go back tonight." A short silence. "You should not have to go back at all," she said, and it was so quiet and so direct and so unhesitant that he didn't have an answer for it, and after a moment he didn't need one because the silence came back, and this time it was a different kind, the kind that has something settled in it, something decided. He was asleep in minutes. In the large stone hall at the center of the sanctuary, the kind of building that had been built when people understood that certain conversations required walls thick enough to hold what was said inside them, the 7 elders of the Veela Council sat around a scrying pool and looked at what the water showed them. 2 children. One on a bench, sleeping with the total unconsciousness of genuine exhaustion. One against a wall, a smaller child in her lap, watching the first one sleep with an expression that was being controlled very carefully. Between their chests, invisible to the naked eye but plain as fire in the pool's clear water, a thread of magic burned in the old double color, silver and gold, braided, pulsing with each heartbeat of both children, deep and steady and entirely, completely, unignorable. Elder Severin was the youngest of the 7 by 12 years and the most dangerous for exactly that reason. She was old enough to have authority and young enough to still believe completely in the rightness of her own judgment. She had silver hair like all of them and eyes like pale river stones, and she sat very straight and very still in the way of someone who has been shocked and is not going to show it. She had not been genuinely shocked by magic in 40 years. Not since her own bonded mate, a human man, kind and limited and entirely unprepared for what the bond between them would cost him, had walked into a situation he couldn't survive because she had trusted his word over her own better knowledge. 40 years of running the calculations, applying the law, severing the connections that formed between their people and humans who were unworthy, ill-prepared, incapable of carrying what a soul bond required. She looked at the thread of light between the 2 children. She looked at it for a long time. "The boy," said Elder Markellen, the oldest of them, her voice carrying the particular texture of someone who has long since stopped performing opinions and merely states them. "What do we know?" "Nothing yet," Severin said. "He is 9. British. No formal magical training. He should not have been able to pass the ward." She paused. "He passed it anyway." "The ley line activated," said Elder Fouquet. "We all felt it." "The ley line has not moved in 40 years, Severin said. "And yet," Markellen said, simply. Severin looked at the image in the pool. The boy was deeply asleep, his face younger and less defended in sleep than it had been in the careful waking expressions she'd watched through the pool sight, the way he'd met Apollon without flinching, the way he'd said all right with a flatness that was not resignation but something more difficult, more earned. Something that recognized itself in the situation without being broken by it. She'd seen that expression before. On very old people. On people who had survived things they shouldn't have had to survive and come out the other side carrying the survival like ballast. Not on a 9-year-old boy. "In the morning," she said, quietly and with complete certainty, "we will sever this." She said it with the authority of 600 years of combined experience behind her, with the weight of every law her people had written to protect themselves from exactly this kind of accidental catastrophe, with the conviction of someone who had seen too many of her people's hearts broken on the reef of human inadequacy to allow it to happen again. No one around the table disagreed out loud. But Elder Markellen, who was 111 years old and had watched 7 generations of her people grow from children to elders and who had learned to read silences the way most people read faces, looked at the old woman to her left and the old woman to her right and the other 4 between them, and she noted the specific quality of their not disagreeing. Then she looked back at the pool. At the light between the children. At the color of it, silver and gold, old and old, older than the sanctuary, older than the laws they had written, older than the stories they told each other about where their magic had come from. She said nothing. She was 111 years old. She knew that some mornings came and did not deliver what had been promised the night before. She folded her hands in her lap and waited to see which kind of morning this would be. Chapter 2, 7 against 1. Dawn in the Scottish Highlands came without ceremony, a slow grey brightening at the eastern edge of the sky that didn't so much arrive as accumulate, the dark becoming less dark by degrees until suddenly you realized you could see your hands. Harry had been awake for 20 minutes before anyone came for him. He'd woken to Gabrielle sitting on his feet. Not maliciously, she'd simply migrated there at some point in the pre-dawn hours, as small children migrate toward warmth, and was now sitting cross-legged on his ankles eating a piece of bread and watching him with the calm, uninhibited stare that children under 8 deploy without apparent awareness of its social weight. "You were snoring," she said, when he opened his eyes. "I don't snore." "You do." A small snore. "Like a cat." Harry sat up. Across the room, Fleur was awake. She looked like she might not have slept much, but her posture was composed, her hair retied neatly, and she was watching him with a kind of brisk attentiveness that suggested she had used the pre-dawn hours to get her thoughts in order. "How long before they come?" Harry asked her. "Soon." She paused. "Genevieve left an hour ago." "I imagine they're already assembled." Outside the small building, the sanctuary had a different quality than it had last night. Last night it had felt inhabited, domestic, the low sounds of a community at rest. Now it felt still in the way a room feels still before a formal occasion, not empty, but held. Waiting. Gabrielle handed Harry her bread. He looked at it. "You look hungry," she said, in the tone of someone who has assessed the situation and reached an equitable solution. "It's yours." "I have more." She didn't, visibly, but her certainty was absolute and he didn't have the heart to argue with it. He ate the bread. Fleur watched this exchange with an expression he couldn't fully read, something complicated moving behind the composure, quickly gone. She looked at the door. "When they come," she said, "let me speak first. The elders respond better to, Fleur." He looked at her steadily. "You don't need to manage me." She stopped. "I understand that you know these people and I don't," he said. "Tell me what I need to know. But don't tell me to be small to make it easier for them. I'm not going to be difficult, but I'm not going to shrink either." The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape, the shape of a person recalibrating. "I was not going to tell you to be small," she said, and her voice had shifted slightly, a layer of the management quality gone, something more direct underneath. "I was going to tell you that Elder Severin responds to stillness better than to defense. She reads agitation as guilt. If you are still, she cannot use your reaction against you." Harry absorbed that. "That's actually useful." "Yes," Fleur said. "That is why I was saying it." A small moment of mutual recalibration, and then Genevieve opened the door, and the morning came in cold and bright, and she said, simply, "The council is ready." The great hall was nothing like the cozy stone building they'd slept in. It was old in the way that pressed on you, high walls of dressed stone that had absorbed centuries of significant moments, the light coming through narrow windows in long slanted columns that hit the floor and stayed there, purposeful. The ceiling was timber, ancient, the beams carved with interlocking patterns Harry couldn't read but whose repetition suggested meaning. The floor was the same stone as last night, and looking at it now, in the morning light, he could almost see where the ley line ran, a faint variation in the color of the rock, a line that crossed the hall from east to west and whose passage through the center of the space felt deliberate. 7 women sat behind a long curved table of dark wood. Harry looked at them and they looked at him. He'd expected severity, and severity was present, but what he hadn't expected was the variety of it. The woman at the center was ancient, not old the way Vernon was old, not old the way his teachers were old, but old the way mountains were old, with a quality of accumulated time that manifested in the complete absence of any need to impress. Her hair was fully white and her eyes were the pale gray color of winter water, and she watched him with an expression of genuine curiosity that was the most neutral thing in the room. That was Elder Markellen. To her right sat a woman who was less than half her age, which still meant considerable, straight-backed and silver-eyed and still in the way of someone who is not being still, who is choosing stillness the way a person chooses a weapon. She looked at Harry with the focused quality of someone conducting a detailed assessment with no intention of sharing the results until she had reached her conclusions. That was Elder Severin. Harry held her gaze and was still. Apollon stood to the side, not at the table, present but not voting, her position clarifying itself in the geometry of the room. Fleur stood 2 feet to Harry's left, chin up, and Gabrielle had apparently slipped in behind them because she was suddenly there at Harry's right, 3 feet tall and absolutely unrepentant about it. Gabrielle, Apollon said, in a tone that carried an entire conversation compressed into a name. I want to see, Gabrielle said. One of the elders, a round-faced woman toward the end of the table with an expression less severe than her colleagues, made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Severin did not look amused, but she also did not look at Gabrielle, which suggested she had decided to absorb the intrusion rather than grant it attention. The child, Severin said. Her English was precise and lightly accented. Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said. You came through the sanctuary ward last night. Yes. Without invitation, without magical training, without knowledge of our kind. She stated each item as a fact, not an accusation, which Harry appreciated as a technique. Accusations could be argued, facts could only be confirmed or denied. That's right, he said. And during your unauthorized presence in our sanctuary, through contact with the ley line that runs beneath this hall, a soul bond formed between you and Fleur Delacour. Who is 11 years old. Who has never met you before last night. Also right. Do you understand what a soul bond is? Fleur explained some of it. It's the most sacred connection your people have. Irreversible, normally. He paused. I didn't ask for it. I also don't think it cares whether I asked. Severin's eyes moved to Fleur. And you confirm the bond's presence. You can see it in the scrying pool, Fleur said. You already confirmed it last night. This question is administrative. One of the other elders, older than Severin, younger than Markellen, with sharp cheekbones and the expression of someone who finds proceedings taking longer than necessary, made a small sound of acknowledgement that might have meant agreement. Severin's attention returned to Harry. The council's position is this: the bond formed under accidental circumstances, without consent, without preparation, and without any assessment of your suitability as a bonded partner for a Veela of this bloodline. The law of our people grants the council authority to sever such bonds when the circumstances of their formation are irregular. We will exercise that authority this morning. You're going to try, Harry said. Severin's eyes sharpened by a fraction. We are going to succeed. All right, Harry said. I'm not going to fight you. But the bond is going to do what it does regardless of what I do. Another small silence. Not the same kind as in the building earlier, this one was being read by 7 different people and measured against 7 different experiences, and its quality apparently meant several different things to each of them. Markellen spoke for the first time, in English that was older-fashioned than Severin's, shaped by a different century. You are very calm for a child facing the council. You haven't done anything frightening yet, Harry said. Markellen looked at him. Then, very slightly, the corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile exactly, more the ghost of one, the suggestion that a smile existed and might, under different circumstances, have been deployed. Severin said, "We will begin." The process was more formal than Harry had expected, not aggressive, not hostile, more like surgery. Methodical. Elder Severin rose from her seat and came around the table and stood before Harry, and she studied him for a long moment with those river-stone eyes, and then she raised one hand, palm toward his chest, and he felt what she was doing before he understood it. It was precise work. He could feel it, a thread of her magic, thin and sharp and very controlled, reaching toward the warm architectural weight in his chest with the specific quality of something designed to find a seam and work it open. Like someone looking for the edge of a weld. Feeling for the join between the bond and him, the place where one ended and the other began, the location of the severance point. There was no join. The bond had no seam. It wasn't attached to him, it was in him, in the same way his bones were in him, in the same way his magic was in him, not layered over the surface but woven through the foundation. Severin's thread of magic found this fact and reported it back to her, and her face did not change, but her eyes did, a fraction of something there, quickly gone. She pressed harder. Harry stood still. He wasn't resisting, he wasn't doing anything consciously at all. His magic sat quietly in his chest and observed Severin's attempt the way a mountain observes weather. Present. Unmoved. Not hostile, not aggressive, simply there in a way that predated the question of whether to yield. The push built. Severin was good, genuinely, extraordinarily good, and he could feel the precision of her, the accumulated skill of decades applied in a single focused point. If he'd been trying to fight her it might have been frightening. Because he wasn't, it was almost interesting. His magic did nothing. After 2 full minutes, and Harry counted them, roughly, because he needed something to do with his attention, Severin withdrew her working and stepped back. Her face was composed. Her eyes were not. "Elder Fouquet," she said. The sharp cheekboned woman stood. She didn't come around the table, she worked from a distance, both hands raised, and her approach was different from Severin's, less like surgery and more like finding leverage, looking for the angle at which a bond could be cracked rather than cut. She was looking for a weak point, Harry understood, a place where the connection had formed under duress or error, a fault line. She didn't find one either. After a minute and a half she lowered her hands and looked at the woman to her left. "Margot," she said. Elder Margot, the round-faced woman who might have suppressed a laugh at Gabrielle's entrance, rose and tried a different approach entirely, working with both hands and a spoken element, something musical and low that resonated in the old timbre of the ceiling and came back down as a different frequency. Harry felt it like a change in air pressure. His ears popped. The bond in his chest tightened slightly, not painfully, more like a rope snapping taut when you test it. The rope held. Margot's voice continued for almost 3 minutes before she let it fall. The silence in the hall was developing a texture. Fleur had not moved. She was standing the way Harry was, still, watching, containing something. He could feel her through the bond, not thoughts or emotions exactly but a quality, her steadiness, her controlled attention, the fact that she was not afraid. He found this useful, the way you find a handhold useful when you're not falling but might be about to. Gabrielle was eating an apple she had produced from somewhere, watching everything with focused interest. The 4th elder tried. The 5th. The 6th, a tall woman who hadn't spoken yet and who worked with her eyes closed, which was somehow the most unsettling approach of all, as if she was doing something that required removing sight from the equation entirely, something felt rather than seen. She worked for 4 minutes. Sweat appeared at her temple. She opened her eyes and looked at Harry with an expression that was not hostile and not afraid but was deeply, genuinely troubled. She sat back down without a word. Only Markellen had not tried. She sat at the center of the table and watched, and her expression throughout had been the one Harry had noted when he came in, that genuine, undisguised curiosity, the look of someone witnessing something they find interesting rather than alarming. "Together, then," Severin said. She had come back around to stand before Harry, and the other 5 who had tried ranged themselves in a line beside her, 3 to each side, and the air in the hall changed again, became the air of a place where 6 significant things are happening simultaneously in the same direction. Harry felt all 6 of them reach at once. It was, not painful, but large. 6 streams of magic, each different in character, each skilled, applied in concert toward a single point in his chest with a coordinated force that would have removed most magical obstacles from existence. He felt the bond respond. Not his magic, the bond itself, which turned out to have opinions about this. The first sign was light. The same light as the ley line, silver gold, braided, appeared in the floor of the hall, brighter than it had been last night, and moved. It ran from the east wall to Harry's feet and up through him and sideways to Fleur, and it did not stop there. It ran along the curved table. It ran up the walls. It moved through the carved patterns in the ceiling beams and lit them from inside, and what had been interlocking abstract shapes became, in the light, unmistakably a story, figures in movement, interlocked, a continuous narrative that covered the entire roof of the hall and whose content, Harry didn't have the context to read but whose significance was evident in the expressions of the people who could. The 6 combined workings hit the bond and the bond pushed back. Not aggressively, not like an attack. More like a tide meeting a cliff. The force came back at the 6 elders not to harm them but simply because it had nowhere else to go, and the 3 on Severin's right stumbled back a step, and Elder Fouquet sat down hard, and the tall woman who had worked with her eyes closed made a sharp sound and put both hands on the table to steady herself. Severin did not stumble. She planted her feet and held and absorbed the returning force through sheer stubborn competence, but her face had gone from composed to something rawer, not frightened, something older than fear, something that was happening to her privately and that Harry was not supposed to see. He looked away from her face because looking felt wrong, like reading someone's mail. The light faded from the ceiling slowly, the carved figures darkening back to decorative shapes, and the ley lines glow receded into the stone. The hall was very quiet. Gabrielle's apple was gone. She was holding the core in one hand, having apparently forgotten about it during the good part. Apollon stood with her arms crossed and her jaw set and an expression on her face that Harry recognized. It was the expression of a parent watching something happen to their child and having no ability to intervene and having strong feelings about that. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the specific pain of helplessness. Fleur turned to look at Harry. He looked back. She raised an eyebrow in an expression that said, plainly, "I told you it wasn't weak." Harry managed not to smile because this was clearly not the moment for it. Markellen said, into the silence, "I will try now." Severin turned to her. "Elder Markellen, I am the eldest," Markellen said, gently but with finality. "Sit down, Celeste." Severin sat down. The use of her given name had done something, taken several decades off the transaction, the way given names do when used by the right person. She sat and her composure had the quality of something rebuilt from the inside, brick by careful brick. Markellen rose slowly, and it was slow not from weakness but from the particular deliberateness of someone who has long since stopped needing to look efficient. She came around the table and stood before Harry, and she was very small, shorter than him, which he was not expecting, and she looked up at him with winter water eyes that were warm despite the color. "May I?" she said. Nobody had asked him that yet. "Yes," Harry said. She placed one hand on his chest, directly over the bond, and her eyes closed. What she did was entirely different from what the others had done. She wasn't trying to cut or crack or lever or dissolve. She was, he had no better word for it, reading. He could feel it. Her magic moved through the bond's presence the way a person traces letters in relief, feeling the depth and shape of something, getting its measure. She stayed there for a long time, longer than anyone else, though it was the gentlest working of all, and when she opened her eyes and took her hand back, her expression had moved from curious to something else. Something that had more weight to it. Something that had named what it was looking at and found the name unexpected. She returned to her seat. "Well," she said, "to the table and the room equally." "It is not severable," Elder Fouquet said. She said it without inflection, as a piece of data, looking at the table in front of her. I have, never encountered that. Not in," she stopped. Started again. "Not in my lifetime." "The ley line chose," Margot said, quietly. She was looking at the floor where the light had run, the line in the stone's color that Harry had noticed this morning. The line has not moved in 40 years. It chose. That is not accidental formation. That is, we do not know what it is, Severin said. Her voice was controlled again. The private thing he'd seen in her face during the combined attempt was gone, or contained, managed back below the surface. We know that the attempt was unsuccessful. We do not know why. We do not know enough about the boy. I'm in the room, Harry said. Several elders looked at him. Severin looked at him. I'm aware, Severin said. Then ask me things, if you want to know them. He kept his voice even. Not confrontational, just direct. I'm not going to pretend I understand what this is or what it means. I know I'm 9 years old and I have no formal training and this is your people's thing, not mine. I know I didn't choose this any more than Fleur did. But I'm not a problem to solve around. If you want to know something about me, ask. The quality of the silence in the room shifted. It was the same hall, the same 7 women, the same gray morning light through the narrow windows, but something had rebalanced, some weight had redistributed, and Harry felt it in the way you feel a room's dynamic change without being able to point to the specific moment it happened. Markellen said, "Your mother's family name." Harry frowned. Evans. Lily Evans. Markellen nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something she had suspected. She looked at Severin. Cross-reference Beaumont's archive, she said. 3rd lineage. The ones who came north in the 8th century. Severin's eyes moved to her. You cannot be suggesting, I am suggesting you check, Markellen said mildly. What's the 8th century? Harry asked. Later, Fleur said, from his left, quietly enough that it was only for him. She has just said something significant. Watch Severin. He watched Severin. The elder's composure was intact but her stillness had changed quality. It was no longer chosen stillness but occupied stillness, the kind that comes over a person when an idea is working through them and they need to hold still while it finishes. She was thinking and the thinking was doing something to her certainty that was visible in microscopic ways, the slight adjustment of her jaw, the fraction of focus shifting in her eyes. What are you, Harry Potter, she said, and it was less a question than a spoken thought, directed at him but not really requiring his answer. That's what I'm trying to work out, he said. Severin looked at him for a long time. He held it, the way he'd held it when she'd stood before him with her working in his chest, still, patient, not performing anything, just present. You are not afraid of me, she said. You haven't done anything frightening, he said, which was more or less the same thing he'd told Markellen, and he could see Markellen register that he'd said it twice. I attempted to sever a bond from your soul, Severin said. Most adults would find that frightening. You didn't manage it, Harry said. And you weren't going to. You could feel that after 30 seconds, I could feel you feel it. So it was never actually frightening, was it? It was just, trying. Severin stared at him. I'm not being rude, he said. It's easier to be precise about what actually happened. Where did you learn to think like that, she said, and the question came out with a texture he hadn't heard from her yet, something less controlled, less official, something that was actually just asking. I grew up with people who were not very honest, Harry said. You learn to be very exact about what things actually are versus what people say they are. Markellen made a sound. It was a very small sound but it contained a great deal. Several of the elders who had been watching Harry now looked at Markellen, and several of them looked at the floor, and one of them, Margot, the round-faced one, looked at Apollon, and Apollon looked back with that same tight, complicated expression. Severin stood. Not agitatedly, deliberately. She moved to the window nearest her and stood with her back to the room, looking out at the sanctuary grounds in the early morning, and nobody spoke while she did this, which told Harry it was not unusual for her. That they waited for her. That she was the kind of person whose silences were respected because they typically produced something worth waiting for. When she turned back, her face had changed. Not softened. Severin did not soften, Harry suspected, not in the direction of sentimentality. But something had gone out of it that had been creating pressure, some component of the position she'd been holding against the evidence. The attempt to sever the bond has been exhausted, she said. All 7 attempts, including the collective. The bond is intact and shows no signs of disturbance. She said this to the room, formally, as though entering it into a record. Then, to Harry directly, you will understand that this is unprecedented in my experience. In the experience of most people in this room. Yes, Harry said. You will also understand that my concern is not arbitrary. My position on this council exists to protect our people. Fleur Delacour is 11 years old. You are 9. Neither of you has the capacity to understand what a soul bond requires of both parties, what it means for her development, her future, I know, Harry said. Severin paused. I know I don't understand it, Harry said. I know it means things I can't see yet. I know you're not wrong to be worried. He looked at her steadily. But the bond is there. You tried 7 times, including all together, and it held. So the question now isn't whether to remove it, it's what to do with it. Right? Severin looked at him for a long moment. Right, she said, and the word came out slightly different than she'd intended it to, he thought, slightly less controlled, slightly more honest. Elder Severin. Fleur's voice, from his left, and he could hear what it was costing her to speak into this particular silence at this particular moment, the discipline in it, the effort of choosing to be heard rather than to stay contained. I am not afraid of this. Severin looked at her. You are 11 years old. I know what I am, Fleur said. And I know what I feel. The bond is not a weight. It does not frighten me. What frightened me last night was the idea that something irreversible had happened without my knowledge, which is a different thing from the bond itself. She paused. I was afraid of not understanding it. I am less afraid now. Because you have had the morning to become comfortable with it? Severin's voice was not unkind. Because he is, Fleur said, and nodded toward Harry. Harry looked at her, surprised. She did not look back, she kept her eyes on Severin, but through the bond he felt something that was not words, a confirmation, a straightforward acknowledgement of a fact she had observed and was now stating. He was calm. His calm had, apparently, been useful to her during the hours they'd been waiting for this meeting. She wasn't saying it sentimentally. She was saying it as information. Severin looked between them. She looked at the floor where the ley line ran. She looked at the ceiling where the carvings were dark again, the story quiet. The council will reconvene, she said. This afternoon. We will discuss the question of the boy's status and what the bond's survival means in legal terms. Her eyes returned to Harry. In the meantime, you will remain in the sanctuary under our observation. You will not attempt to access any area of the grounds beyond the main buildings. You will not attempt to engage with the ley line or any other element of the sanctuary's magical structure. I didn't try to engage with it the first time, Harry said. No, she said. Which is part of what concerns me. She said it without malice, the statement of someone who is finding that the things that concern them are not the things they expected to concern them. Genevieve will see to you. She looked at Gabrielle, whose small face was turned up to all of this with the absorbed interest of someone at an excellent theater. And someone, Severin said, should give that child another apple. Gabrielle beamed. Even Severin, visibly, against what appeared to be considerable internal resistance, could not maintain a completely neutral expression in the face of Gabrielle beaming. The elders filed out. Markellen last, and she stopped beside Harry on her way past, and she looked up at him with those old curious eyes, and she said, very quietly, so only he could hear it, your mother's line. You should ask someone to tell you about it. Not today. When you are older and the ground is more solid. A pause. But ask. Then she went, and the hall was empty except for Harry and Fleur and Gabrielle and Apollon, who remained by the wall. For a moment nobody said anything. Then Gabrielle said, "You were very good. You stood very still." "Thank you," Harry said. "Fleur said you would be still. She said it before we came in." Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a moment, not into embarrassment exactly, more into a recognition that she'd been caught in a small honesty, having predicted him accurately to her 7-year-old sister. She looked at the far wall. "I observe things," she said. "You also said," Gabrielle began. "Gabrielle," Fleur said. "That he had an honest face for someone who had learned not to be seen." Silence. "Gabrielle," Fleur said again, and this time it was very quiet. "That is a compliment," Gabrielle said to Harry, earnestly. "In case you are uncertain." Harry looked at Fleur, who was still looking at the far wall with the expression of someone who has decided that the far wall is deeply interesting and deserves full attention. "I know," he said. Apollon crossed the room and crouched in front of him, which put her face level with his, and she looked at him with those luminous eyes, the same strange color as her daughter's, the not quite blue, the lit from inside, and she put one hand briefly on the side of his uninjured face. It was not a gesture he was used to receiving. He stilled under it. "You did well," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything." "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what you did, and it is much harder than it sounds." She searched his face for a moment. "Are you all right?" Nobody asked him that, normally. The question sat in him in a slightly awkward way, finding space where space wasn't usually made. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." She looked at him a moment more. Then she stood, and her expression had moved from what it was during the trial, that tight, helpless quality, to something more settled. Not happy with the situation, but settled within it. Making the decisions that the settled look is the precursor to. "You will stay," she said. "Until we understand this better. The council will argue this afternoon and there will be," she glanced at Fleur, "significant disagreement. But the bond survived 7 elders working jointly. Severin will apply the law, but even she cannot apply law to something the magic itself has already answered." A pause. "I will send word to arrange things with your family." Harry opened his mouth. "Not because they deserve consideration," Apollon said, and her voice was measured and careful and very, very controlled, "but because it will create fewer complications. For you." She looked at him clearly. "What has happened to you in that house is not going to continue. Whatever else remains uncertain today, that is not." Harry looked at her. He was 9 years old, and he was in a magical sanctuary in the Scottish Highlands, and the bond in his chest was warm and steady, and a woman he had known for less than 12 hours had just stated, as simple fact, that a thing that had always been true, that things at the cottage were not going to change, could not change, had been this way as long as he could remember and would be so as long as he could see forward, was going to stop. He didn't believe it entirely. He was too old for the shape of that kind of trust to form quickly. But he noted it. He put it somewhere, a shelf in a room he kept carefully, and he noted that she had said it without softening it or hedging it, said it the way her daughter said things, plainly, fully, because she meant it. "Okay," he said. Gabrielle took his hand. It was entirely unprompted, she simply reached out and took it the way small children do, with the complete confidence of someone who has decided a thing and sees no reason to make it complicated. He looked down at her. She looked up at him with those silver-lit eyes. "You can sit next to me at breakfast," she said. "Gabrielle," Fleur said. "He may not want, do you want to?" Gabrielle asked Harry. "Yeah," Harry said. "All right." "Good," said Gabrielle, and she led him toward the door of the hall, past the empty curve of the elders' table, past the ley line's faint trace in the stone, out into the morning. Fleur followed, 2 steps behind, and she did not say anything, but through the bond Harry felt what she did not say, something that had no good name yet, something that was not warm exactly but was the shape warmth makes before it arrives. The space that warmth will occupy, already cleared. Behind them, in the empty hall, the carved patterns in the ceiling were dark and still and patient. Waiting, as old things wait, for the story to catch up. In the building she had used as a study for 40 years, Elder Severin sat at her desk and stared at a piece of paper she had not yet written on. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and put a line of gold across the desk. She watched it for a moment. 9 years old. Not afraid of 7 elders. Still as a stone while 6 of them worked their combined strength against something in his chest that hadn't even flinched. It was never actually frightening, was it? It was just trying. She picked up her pen. She wrote, Lily Evans, Evans lineage, Beaumont Archive, 3rd lineage, 8th century North migration. She stared at what she'd written. Then she wrote underneath it, smaller, as though she were making a note to herself that she wasn't sure she believed yet, the bond chose correctly. The ley line knew. She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she capped the pen and stood up and went to find the archive. Chapter 3, What the Bond Knows. Breakfast in the sanctuary was nothing like Privet Drive. At Privet Drive, breakfast was a transaction. Aunt Petunia cooked for 3, and Harry cooked or ate what remained, which was usually the order of operations and which everyone had stopped pretending was coincidental. The kitchen had a quality of performed normalcy that required significant energy to maintain and left everyone tired by 9 in the morning. The sanctuary's kitchen was a long stone room with a central table that had clearly been extended by someone who kept adding leaves and never taking them out, so that it was now approximately the size of a small road. Women moved around it with the comfortable efficiency of a space where the same patterns had been repeated long enough to become instinct. There were children. Harry hadn't registered how many people lived here, but the evidence at breakfast was substantial. Girls mostly, ranging from Gabrielle's age to teenagers, silver and blonde, and one auburn head near the end that stood out like a struck match. Gabrielle had made good on her promise, planting herself in a chair near the middle and patting the one beside her with the authority of a property owner. Harry sat. Within 30 seconds he had a bowl of something hot and substantial in front of him that tasted like someone had made porridge and then decided porridge was insufficient and kept going. Fleur sat across from him. She ate with the brisk efficiency of someone who has decided that food is fuel and its philosophical dimensions are not currently relevant, but she looked up every few minutes with that quick, assessing quality, checking. He wasn't sure what she was checking for. Whether he was comfortable, maybe. Whether the room was being acceptable to him. He found it more touching than he would have expected. The girl with the red hair, he said quietly, nodding toward the end of the table. She's not, Vivian, Fleur said. Her mother is one of ours. Her father is not. A slight pause. She has been here since she was 4. Some people are more one thing than another. The sanctuary makes room. Harry thought about that. How many people live here? Permanently, about 30. More in summer. The elders hold council twice a year and people come from elsewhere. France, mostly. Some from Greece and Bulgaria. She broke her bread without looking at it. It is smaller than it used to be. Used to be? Our numbers are fewer than they were. She said it without self-pity, just as fact. Each generation there are fewer of us. The bloodlines disperse. People choose human lives and their children are, she tilted a hand in a gesture that was not dismissive but resigned, more human. The sanctuary is for those who are more Veela than not. Gabrielle, who had been attending to her porridge with focused dedication, looked up and said, I am very Veela. You are, Fleur said. More than you. That is not, Fleur stopped. Finish your breakfast. I am more emotionally Veela, Gabrielle said to Harry, very seriously. Fleur is more strategically Veela. Elder Markellen says these are equally important but different expressions of the same, Gabrielle. Ancestral, Gabrielle. Gabrielle returned to her porridge with the serene expression of someone who has successfully delivered their message. Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur was looking at the ceiling with an expression that was managing something between exasperation and helpless affection. He decided not to comment on it because she would appreciate that, which was itself a small revelation, that after less than 12 hours he knew what she would appreciate. The bond, or just, her. He wasn't sure yet where the line was. After breakfast, Genevieve appeared with the specific energy of someone who has been assigned a task and intends to execute it thoroughly. She led Harry to a small room that had clearly been hastily repurposed as guest quarters, a narrow bed, a window looking out over the cleared grounds, a washstand with a mirror above it. Clean clothes that were roughly his size, which was either impressive or slightly unsettling. "There is a boy in the village who is near your size," Genevieve said, answering the unasked question. "Apollon sent someone this morning." "That was fast," Harry said. Apollon moves quickly when she has decided a direction. Genevieve left him to wash and change, and he stood in front of the small mirror and looked at himself. The right eye had come down considerably from last night. Genevieve's work, and whatever Fleur's was, had managed the swelling to a yellow-purple bruise that looked worse than it felt. His glasses were cracked and he couldn't do anything about that. He looked like himself. He always looked like himself, which was a minor miracle given how often and comprehensively the Dursleys tried to make him look like a problem. Small, dark-haired, thin in the way of children who are not quite getting enough, but his eyes were his mother's eyes, everyone who had ever known his mother said so, green and direct and not carrying anything they didn't mean to. He pressed one hand to his chest. The bond was there. Warm, steady, the same gentle presence it had been since midnight. He'd been expecting it to feel stranger in the daylight. It didn't. It felt like it had always been there, and the strangeness was that he hadn't noticed it before. He changed clothes and went outside. The sanctuary in full morning light was a different place than the Rainan firelit mystery of last night. The buildings were low and practical, built into the hillside at the northern end of the clearing, stone that had gone silvery gray with age. The central fire pit was empty now, swept clean for daylight. To the east, a kitchen garden in the late summer state of having produced too much of everything and not quite enough time to deal with it, heavy-headed sunflowers, cabbages going to seed, an apple tree near the wall whose fruit was 3 weeks from ripe. To the west, the ground sloped up toward the pines, and beyond the pines the moorland opened wide and went on to the mountains. Fleur was in the kitchen garden. She was not gardening, she was sitting on the stone wall with a book open across her knees, and she looked up when he came around the corner with the expression of someone who had been aware he was approaching before he arrived. "The bond," she said, by way of explanation. "I knew when you left the building." "Is it always like that?" "I don't know," she said. "I have nothing to compare it to." Harry sat on the wall a few feet from her, not so close as to be presumptuous, not so far as to be performing distance. The morning was bright and cold the way Highland mornings are, the sky a hard clean blue with the kind of visibility that makes the mountains look close enough to touch. A bird, a kestrel, he thought, was doing something efficient and beautiful over the heather to the west. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair." He watched the kestrel. "When you said last night that my parents probably didn't die in a car accident. You didn't say that, but that was what you meant." A pause. "I said the story had gaps. In not so many words." "But yes." "How did you know?" Fleur looked at her book for a moment, then closed it, keeping her thumb at the page. "Your magic is extraordinary," she said. "I felt it through the bond during the trial. Not just its strength but its quality. Very old. Very deep. Magic like that does not come from nowhere. It comes from bloodlines. Your mother's line is significant, even if you don't know it yet. Markellen saw it immediately. She paused. And people with that kind of lineage do not die in car accidents. They die of other things. Usually magical things. Usually on purpose. Harry sat with that for a moment. He'd half known it his whole life, that the story didn't close properly, that there were gaps shaped like things that had been deliberately removed, but having someone state it out loud was different. Not worse, exactly. More solid. The difference between a vague unease and a specific fact you can put on a shelf and look at. My aunt would know, he said. Almost certainly. She hates magic. Yes, Fleur said. That is often how it goes, with people who are afraid of something. The kestrel found what it was looking for and dropped into the heather and was gone. What happens now? Harry said. Practically. The elders said this afternoon for the second meeting. They will argue about your status, Fleur said. Specifically whether you can remain in the sanctuary, what your relationship to our community is considered to be under our law, and what the bond means for both of us going forward. She said it with the crispness of someone who has already done the analysis. Severin will argue for minimum integration, acknowledge the bond's existence, establish contact protocols that keep you at distance until you are of age and can make informed choices. She will say this protects both of us. And what's the argument against that? Fleur looked at him. The bond does not function at distance, she said. Not well. It is, I felt it this morning when you were in the building and I was here. A kind of pressure. Not painful. But present. Like a sound just below hearing that you can feel in your teeth. She paused. It would be worse over miles. Over years. So what's the alternative? That you stay, she said simply. For the remainder of the summer at minimum. That the council acknowledges you as a bonded guest of the sanctuary rather than an intruder. That Apollon takes, she stopped, seemed to make a decision, some form of guardianship. Temporary. While the situation is understood. Harry looked at her. You've already talked to your mother about this. This morning. Before breakfast. And she agrees. She is considering it, Fleur said, with the slight diplomatic careful quality of someone whose mother had said yes but wanted the decision to appear more deliberated. She is, Maman is not an impulsive person. She thinks before she does things. But her thinking, when she does it properly, generally arrives in the right place. Harry turned this over. Staying. Not going back to the cottage, not going back to Privet Drive, not going back to the complicated daily arithmetic of minimizing his presence in his own life. Staying in a place where the bond sat comfortably in his chest and a 7-year-old had given him half her breakfast and an ancient woman had touched his face with the gentleness of someone who understood, without needing to be told, that gentleness was not something he got regularly. The elders might not agree, he said. Some of them will not. Severin will not, at first. She said at first with an emphasis that was specific, not wishful, more observational, like someone reading a trajectory. But what happened in the hall this morning, the light, the ceiling, all of it, that was not nothing. Even Severin is too honest to call it nothing. What was it? The ceiling. Fleur looked at the mountains for a moment. The carvings tell the founding story of our people, she said. When and why the sanctuary was built. The ley lines, the elders who came first, the bonds they made with the land. She paused. And the bonds they made with others. The first alliances. The ones made before our laws were written, when the criteria were purely, whether the magic agreed. A beat. The magic agreed this morning. Harry absorbed that. Something about it settled somewhere deep, not triumphant, not even particularly surprised. More like, yes. Of course. That must be extremely annoying for Severin, he said. Fleur made the almost laugh sound again, and this time it went a little further, not quite a laugh but close, bright and brief and genuine. Extraordinarily, she said. Yes. They sat in the morning with the garden behind them and the mountains ahead, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence had the comfortable texture of a thing being built, not by effort but by accumulation, the small bricks of shared honesty laying themselves in a row. I want to tell you something, Fleur said. Okay. When Gabrielle was in the thorn bush last night, she stopped. Seemed to be calibrating the depth of what she was about to say. I came out of the building because I felt her go past the ward boundary. I always feel when she goes where she shouldn't. It is a twin thing, the elders say, though we are not twins. I am 2 years older. But I have always known where she is. She paused. When I came through the trees and I saw you crouching beside her, working the thorns free, the careful way you were doing it, not rushing, another pause. I knew you were safe. Before the bond. Before the bond, she confirmed. I was 11 years old and I knew you were safe in the way you know things before you have evidence for them. And then the bond happened and I thought, well. Perhaps the bond knew too. She looked at the garden rather than at him. I am telling you this because I think you should know that it was not only the magic. That I am not, she seemed to search for the word, only a participant in this. That I have some view of my own. Harry looked at the side of her face. For what it's worth, he said, I knew you were someone I could be honest with before I finished my first sentence. She turned and looked at him. He looked back. How, she said. You told me to sit down because I looked like I was going to fall over. You didn't say I looked fine. You didn't say don't worry. You just said the true thing. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, the same thing that had shifted after he'd said I'm not going to pretend in the trial, the layer of management going, the thing underneath coming forward, more direct and more real. I say the true thing, she said. Always. It irritates people. It doesn't irritate me. No, she said. I know. They went in for lunch when Gabrielle appeared around the corner to collect them, which she did with the efficiency of someone who has been sent on a mission and considers it successfully completed the moment she locates the targets. She walked between them back to the main building with one hand attached to Harry's wrist and the other swinging freely, and she talked without pause about the fox she had been looking for last night before the thornbush incident, and whether Harry had ever seen a Highland fox, and what he thought foxes were thinking when they looked at you, and whether foxes had magic. I don't think foxes have magic, Harry said. But you have magic and you didn't know, Gabrielle said, with impeccable logic. Harry considered this. That's fair. Lunch was loud and large and the long table held the community's full weight, and Harry sat in the middle of it and was introduced to approximately 20 people in rapid succession, and he retained about a third of their names, which was a respectable fraction. People were curious about him but not hostile. The curiosity had the quality of people who have already received briefing information and are now forming their own impressions. Some of them were warm immediately. Some were watchful. A few of the teenagers looked at him with the particular assessment of people who are deciding whether to take him seriously, which he understood was a fair evaluation process, and waited it out. An older girl of about 14 called Sylvie sat beside him for part of lunch and asked him direct questions about British magic with a scholarly interest that he had to repeatedly explain he couldn't answer because he didn't know anything. But you are magical, she said, looking at him with a pencil she'd produced from somewhere. You have significant magical ability. Apparently. I've just never been taught anything. What do you do with it, then? Accidentally, he said. She wrote something down. He didn't ask what. Apollon moved through the lunch with the particular quality of a host who is also thinking about other things, present, engaged, but clearly conducting a parallel process somewhere behind her eyes. She stopped beside Harry at one point and set a cup of tea near him without comment, and he understood this as what it was, a gesture towards staying without making it verbal yet. He drank the tea. The afternoon came and the elders reassembled, and this time Harry and Fleur were not summoned. They waited in the kitchen garden while the afternoon lengthened and the shadows of the hills moved across the clearing, and they sat on the wall again and Fleur read and Harry watched the sky and they coexisted with a naturalness that both of them found, independently and without saying so, remarkable for its lack of effort. Gabrielle joined them at intervals, disappearing and returning with the randomness of a satellite in an eccentric orbit, once with a second apple, once with a drawing she had made of Harry that she presented to him with modest pride. He looked at it. It was a fairly good likeness, actually, given that she was 7. She had given him enormous green eyes and had accurately captured the cracked glasses. "This is very good," he said. Gabrielle beamed. "I draw everyone," she said. "I have drawn all the elders. Even Severin." "What does your drawing of Severin look like?" Gabrielle considered. "Like someone who is thinking very hard about something sad," she said, which was so precisely accurate that Fleur lowered her book and looked at her sister with an expression of startled appreciation. "When did you get perceptive?" Fleur said. "I was always perceptive," Gabrielle said serenely. "You only recently started noticing." The elders' meeting lasted 3 hours. Apollon came out first, and the look on her face was the settled one, the one that had made its decisions. She walked across the clearing to the garden with purpose. "The council has reached a position," she said, and she addressed both of them because that was the appropriate thing and she knew it. "They have agreed, with some dissent, that the bond's survival through the trial constitutes sufficient magical authority to recognize its legitimacy. Harry will be acknowledged as a bonded guest of the sanctuary under our laws." She paused. "Not a member. A guest. With the rights and protections of a bonded guest, which are substantial." Another pause. "He will remain for the rest of the summer." "And after?" Fleur said. "After is being negotiated." Apollon looked at Harry. "You will receive your Hogwarts letter in 2 years. That is, there is a question of what happens between now and then that we are still discussing. But for now. The summer." Harry nodded. "The dissent," he said. "Severin. Among others." "Yes." Apollon didn't pretend otherwise. "Severin voted against recognition. She abstained from the question of your stay, which is, in her terms, a concession." She looked at him clearly. "She is not your enemy, Harry. I want you to understand that. She is someone who has been hurt by what she is trying to prevent, and that makes her judgment both imperfect and sincere." "I know," Harry said. Apollon looked at him, slightly surprised. "I could feel it in the trial," he said. "When she was working, there was something in it that wasn't just technique. Like she was trying to stop something she'd already seen happen somewhere else." He paused. "What happened to her?" Apollon was quiet for a moment. "That is her story," she said carefully. "If she chooses to tell you, she will. But you are perceptive. A beat. Dangerously so, for 9 years old." "He is always like that," Gabrielle said from behind the apple tree, where she had apparently been for some time without anyone noticing. "Gabrielle," said Apollon, Fleur, and the apple tree simultaneously. That evening, the sanctuary had a different quality, something acknowledged, something settled, a shift in the social air that Harry could feel the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before you see it in the sky. People nodded to him differently at dinner. Genevieve brought him a better book to replace the tourist pamphlet he'd been rereading since he'd found it in the guest room. Sylvie came and asked him 12 more questions he couldn't answer and seemed to find this fascinating rather than frustrating. After dinner, while Apollon was getting Gabrielle to bed through what sounded like a substantial negotiation, Harry and Fleur ended up in the main building by the fire, which was lit properly now, filling the room with orange gold light and the smell of pine. The evening had come down cold. "I want to show you something," Fleur said. She held out her hand, palm up, and concentrated, and after a moment a flame appeared in her palm. Not large, the size of a candle flame, but clean and steady and silver white rather than orange, with the quality of something that was hers, generated rather than borrowed. Harry watched it. "Veela fire," she said. "We can all do it. It is one of the first things we learn." She looked at him over the flame. "Can you try something?" "Not that specifically. But, whatever comes naturally." "I don't control it," he said. "You don't control it consciously," she said. "But it is yours. It knows you. Don't try to do something. Just, offer the space. Invite it." He thought about that. He looked at his own hand and thought about what his magic felt like, which was like trying to look at something using peripheral vision. You could see it better when you weren't looking directly. He thought about the way it had moved toward the ley line, naturally, without asking. Like reaching toward warmth. He held out his hand and thought, "Here." The flame in Fleur's palm went sideways. Not extinguished, mirrored. A second flame appeared in his palm, the same silver white, and he stared at it with a feeling somewhere between astonishment and recognition. "I didn't do that," he said. "The bond did," Fleur said. "Or rather, the bond translated. Your magic follows the same channels mine uses, at least for this." She looked at both flames. In theory, a bonded Veela pair would eventually develop complementary abilities. "I have never heard of a bond forming outside our people, so I don't know what it means that," she stopped. In his palm, the silver-white flame had developed an edge of gold. Just at the base, where the flame met his skin, a ring of gold that wasn't in hers, that was entirely his, the silver-white of the bond and something else entirely, something older and deeper than any of this, that made the hairs stand up on her arm. She stared at it. "What?" Harry said. "The gold," she said. "That color. That is," she seemed to be searching. "That is the color of the ley line. The original magic. The thing that was here before we were." He looked at the flame in his palm. Gold at the base. Silver white on top. Burning steadily, quietly, like something that had known it was going to be here eventually and had simply been waiting for the right moment to arrive. "Should I be worried?" he said. "No," she said, and her voice was very certain. "No. I think that is exactly what it is supposed to look like." She looked up from the flame to his face. "I think you are more than your family told you." He extinguished the flame, it went out the moment he thought about it, clean and complete. His palm was warm but not burned. "Markellen said something similar," he said. "About my mother's line. The 8th century." "I know," Fleur said. "I asked her this afternoon what she meant." He looked at her. "She told me," Fleur said carefully, "that your mother's line, the Evans lineage, is a truncated branch of something much older. People who came down from Scotland in the 8th century, long before the Statute of Secrecy, when magic was not divided into categories the way it is now. She said the old records in Beaumont's archive, that is the Veela's oldest historical collection, describe a line of humans with whom the first Veelas formed alliances. Not bonds, exactly. Something older than our current bonding. A recognition." She paused. She said when she put her hand on your chest she felt that recognition. Like meeting something you thought was gone. Harry was quiet for a moment. "So the bond wasn't an accident," he said. "Markellen thinks not," Fleur said. "I think not. Even Severin," she hesitated, "even she is struggling to call it accidental. She was in that archive this afternoon. Genevieve told me she requested 3 specific records and sat with them for 2 hours. Through the window, the Highland dark had come down fully, and the stars were out, more of them than you could see from any street, undiluted by any other light." Harry watched them for a moment. "My whole life," he said, slowly, "the Dursleys made me feel like I was too much. Like I took up the wrong kind of space. Like something about me was wrong at the base of it." He wasn't looking for sympathy, he was saying it clearly, putting it in the accurate words. But the bond pushed back when they tried to cut it. And the ceiling lit up. And Markellen looked at me like she'd found something she'd been looking for. He looked at the window. None of that fits the story I was given about myself. No, Fleur said. It doesn't. That's going to take some getting used to. I imagine it will, she said. Most true things do. He looked at her. She was watching the fire with the calm, direct quality she had when she wasn't managing anything, when the observation was purely for its own sake. In the firelight, her hair was less silver and more gold, and her eyes caught the flame and held it, and she was 11 years old and she had said I say the true thing, always like a person who had made a decision about how to live and was not interested in revising it. I'm glad you were in the thorn bush, he said. She turned to look at him. Gabrielle, he clarified. I'm glad she was in the thorn bush. Because otherwise I'd have just stood at the tree line like an idiot watching the fire. You would have come in eventually, Fleur said. Would I? Yes, she said. You do not stand still when you have a choice. She said it with the same precision she used for everything, observational, not complimentary and not unkind. Just accurate. You would have found a reason. Maybe. You walked 4 miles through a highland storm at night rather than stay in a house where you were being hurt, she said. You would have found a reason. He had nothing to say to that. She was right, and she said it like she was, and he let it stand. Apollon appeared in the doorway, Gabrielle's voice still audible distantly behind her requesting one more story, and looked at the two of them by the fire with an expression that was complicated in a quiet way, a parent seeing something that is not what she planned and finding it more right than what she planned. Bed, she said, to Fleur primarily and Harry by extension. The council will want to speak with you both tomorrow, individually. You should both be rested. Severin? Fleur said. Harry looked up. Alone, he said. She was specific about it, Apollon said. She looked at him, and her expression carried the same careful honesty it always did. I will be nearby. You don't have to do it. But I think, she paused, I think she has something to say that is not for the council. Something personal. And I think you can handle it. I know, Harry said. Apollon's expression did the thing it did sometimes, that flash of something not quite named, surprise adjacent, the revision running in real time. She was still not entirely used to him, he thought. Still finding the edges of the shape of him. That was all right. He was finding the edges of himself too, here, in this place, and it was turning out that some of those edges were in entirely different places than he'd been told. He went to bed. The guest room was quiet and the mattress was better than the one in the cupboard, which was not a high bar but was a bar meaningfully cleared. Through the bond, distantly, he could feel Fleur in the room 2 doors down, the same presence as always, the someone in the next room quality, neither intrusive nor absent. He lay on his back and looked at the old ceiling beams and thought about gold flames and 8th century bloodlines and a woman who had been sitting with archive records for 2 hours because something she'd decided was impossible had turned out not to be. He thought about his mother. He'd never had much to think about her with, 2 or 3 photographs, Aunt Petunia's silences that were shaped like her, the look on his aunt's face when she said the word abnormal that was not entirely hatred, that had something older underneath it, something that might in different circumstances have been grief. He'd always stored these things on the shelf and not looked at them too directly because there wasn't enough of them to look at. He thought about her now and let himself do it properly, without managing it. Lily Evans. A line that had come down from Scotland in the 8th century. A line that the Veela's oldest records knew about and that Markellen had recognized in him from a single touch. His mother had known, he thought. Whatever she was, she had known. And whatever she had known had been important enough to someone that she was dead because of it. He put that on the shelf too. Not to forget it, to keep it clear, where he could see it, where it could be as large as it actually was instead of compressed into the shape of a story that didn't fit. He closed his eyes. Outside, an owl called once over the moorland, and the Highland dark was vast and quiet and extraordinarily, completely indifferent to anyone's plans for it, which was, he thought, just as it should be. Some things were bigger than plans. The bond agreed, warm and steady in his chest, and Harry Potter went to sleep in a sanctuary that had found him and held him and was not, under any circumstances, going to let 7 elders tell it otherwise. In her study, Elder Severin sat with 3 archive records open on her desk and a piece of paper on which she had written and crossed out 4 different ways to begin the conversation she was going to have tomorrow morning with a 9-year-old boy. The 4th crossed-out attempt read, "I was wrong about the nature of the bond and here is what I have found." She crossed it out because it was too blunt. The 5th attempt, the one she eventually left uncrossed, read simply, "Tell me about your mother." She looked at that for a long time. Then she looked at the archive records. The 3rd lineage. The 8th century migration. The description, in ink that had faded to the color of old honey, of a line of humans who carried something in their blood that the early Veela scholars had called, for lack of a better term, la lumière ancienne. The ancient light. She thought about the gold at the base of a flame she had seen described in 700-year-old field notes, and the same color running through a ley line that had not moved in 40 years, and the ceiling of the great hall lit from inside by a story she had known since childhood and had apparently not fully understood. She closed the records. Set them aside. Thought about a man she had loved 50 years ago who had not been ready for what she was, and who had broken in the trying, and who she had spent every year since then using as the primary evidence for a conclusion she had perhaps reached too soon. She sat with that for a while. Then she went to bed, because tomorrow was going to require her to be rested, and whatever else could be said about Celeste Severin, she was practical enough to know when to stop thinking and start sleeping. She slept. And in the great hall, the ley line moved through its ancient course beneath the stone, silver and gold, deep and steady, entirely unbothered by anyone's plans. Chapter 4, Old Bones and Older Magic. Severin was already in the garden when Harry came outside. She was standing by the apple tree with her hands clasped behind her back, looking at the fruit with the expression of someone who is not actually looking at the fruit. She had a cup of tea. The steam from it rose straight up in the still morning air, which meant she'd been out here long enough for the wind to drop, which meant she'd been here a while. Harry walked across the clearing and stood a few feet away and did not say good morning because she hadn't and the symmetry felt right. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said, nodding at the stone wall. He sat. She remained standing, which he recognized as a positioning choice, not aggressive, more like someone who thinks better on their feet. He'd noticed it in the trial. She'd stood for the entire council meeting while the others sat. "Tell me about your mother," she said. Harry looked at her steadily. "I don't know much." "Tell me what you know." "Her name was Lily Evans. She died when I was 1. I was told it was a car accident. I have 3 photographs, one of her laughing, one of her and my father at what looks like a school somewhere, one with me as a baby." He paused. "My aunt is her sister. My aunt hates magic and does not discuss her." Severin was quiet, taking this in. "The car accident," she said. "I know it wasn't," Harry said. "I've always half known. You said it out loud, more or less, when you asked Markellen to check the archive." Her expression shifted, faintly. "You parsed that from 4 words and a tone of voice. It was fairly clear." She studied him. "Your aunt told you nothing." "My aunt told me as little as she could. She doesn't talk about my mother as a person who existed. More like, a category of problem." Severin set her cup on the wall. "Your mother," she said, "was a Muggle-born witch. That is the term, Muggle-born. Someone with no apparent magical ancestry who displays magical ability anyway." She paused. "Except that your mother was not actually Muggle-born. She was what the wizarding world calls Muggle-born because nobody had looked far enough back. The Evans lineage, on paper, shows no magic for 5 generations. Before that, the records are sparse. Before that, the records don't exist in any wizarding archive because the family stopped living in wizarding spaces in the 18th century and the trail goes cold. Harry said, but the Veela archive goes back further. The Veela archive goes back to the 8th century, Severin said. And in the 8th century, the Evans line, under a different name, a Gaelic name that translates to something like the Bright Ones, lived in this region. They were not Veela. They were not any category of magical being that your modern wizarding world has a classification for. They were, she paused, choosing words with care, what the scholars called the Lumière Ancienne. Ancient light bearers. Humans who carried, in their bloodline, a resonance with the oldest layer of magic. The layer that underlies everything else. Ley lines. Natural magic. The kind that existed before anyone learned to direct it with a wand or a word. Harry sat with this. It didn't feel like being told something new. It felt like being told the name of something he'd always been carrying. My magic, he said. Is not like most wizarding magic, Severin said. I felt that immediately in the trial. Most magical ability, even considerable ability, has a grain to it. A direction. It has been shaped by heritage, by training, by the categories of magic people have learned to think in. Yours has no grain. It is entirely undifferentiated. Raw. She looked at him. Do you know what that means practically? It means it can do things that have a grain can't, Harry said. She paused. Yes. That is exactly what it means. She picked up her tea. It also means it is extraordinarily dangerous without training, and extraordinarily powerful with it. But that is a separate conversation. Okay, Harry said. So my mother had this lineage and didn't know about it because the records don't exist in the wizarding world and her sister is a muggle who, he stopped. Something was connecting. My aunt knows she comes from something old and magical and she's terrified of it. That's why she hates it. Not just because she didn't inherit it. Because she knows what it is and it frightens her. Severin looked at him for a long moment. You are, she said, extremely quick. It's not, he paused. It's pattern recognition. The Dursleys are very consistent people. Once you understand their patterns you can see the shapes they make around things they won't discuss directly. Petunia Dursley, Severin said, carefully, has known since she was a teenager what her family carried. Her mother told her. Not in the wizarding context, no wizarding context, no framework, just, we come from something, your sister has it, you don't, be proud of it regardless. A beat. Petunia was not proud. She was frightened, then resentful, then angry, and by the time your mother died she had been angry for long enough that the anger had calcified into a reflex. Harry looked at her. How do you know this? I did not know specifically, she said. I am extrapolating from records and from 40 years of experience with what happens to people who stand adjacent to ancient magic and cannot touch it. The shape of their response is consistent. She set the cup down again. What I know specifically is your mother's lineage. What I am telling you about your aunt is inference. Accurate inference, though, Harry said. I believe so. He was quiet for a moment. A robin landed on the wall near his hand, regarded him, decided he was acceptable, and began investigating a gap in the mortar with professional focus. Why are you telling me this? Harry said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Yesterday you were trying to break the bond. Severin was quiet for a moment. Then she sat on the wall on the other side of the robin, a few feet away, and for the first time since he'd met her she looked like someone who was not entirely in a position. Just, a person, with the morning around her. Because I owe you the truth, she said. I attempted to sever a bond that I told this council I was certain I could sever. I was wrong. In my experience, being wrong about something that's significant requires honest accounting. Okay, Harry said. And because, she stopped. She looked at the apple tree for a moment. The apples were 3 weeks from ripe and green and heavy on the branch. 50 years ago I had a bonded mate who was human. His name was Thomas. He was a good man. Patient, kind, genuinely good in the ways that matter more than ability. A pause. He was not prepared for what the bond required of him. Not his fault, I did not prepare him. I assumed that love and goodwill were sufficient, and they are not. The bond asks things that neither love nor goodwill alone can answer. It asks, presence. Sustained, complete, honest presence. She looked at her hands. He broke under it. Not catastrophically. He simply diminished. Over years, the requirements of bonding with something as old as our magic, without the training or heritage to sustain it, cost him pieces of himself. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late to undo it. Harry was very still. He died, she said, simply. Naturally, not young, but diminished. Not the man he was. And I spent 40 years deciding that the lesson was that human bonds were wrong. That the protection of my people required preventing what happened to Thomas from happening again. She looked at Harry directly. Last night I sat with an archive that told me the Evans lineage carried lumière ancienne, and I understood that the thing that happened to Thomas happened because he was an ordinary man bonded to something ancient without the foundation to bear it. But you are not an ordinary human, Harry. You carry the same quality of magic as the bond you're in. The ley line knew this. The magic knew this. A short pause, was operating on a 40-year-old conclusion that the new evidence does not support. Harry looked at her. You're telling me you were wrong, he said. And that you know why you were wrong. Yes. And that the 40 years of trying to prevent something was based on a real thing, just applied to the wrong situation. Severin looked at him with an expression that was entirely unguarded, the first time he'd seen her face without its management layer, just the woman underneath, who was 78 years old and very tired and very honest when she chose to be. Yes, she said. Exactly. Thomas would have been all right if he'd had what I have, Harry said. I believe so. Then it wasn't your fault, Harry said. Not entirely. You couldn't have known without the information. And you didn't have the information. She was very still. The robin, apparently satisfied with the mortar, departed. You are 9 years old, she said. I know. Most adults could not have said that. Most adults have more to lose by being precise about fault, Harry said. I don't have anything at stake in this except what's actually true. Severin looked at the mountains for a long moment. Something in her face was working, not emotional in the surface way, more the deep slow movement of something shifting that has been in one position long enough to make a groove. I will not oppose your presence in the sanctuary, she said. Or Apollin's guardianship arrangements. I will not obstruct the bond's acknowledgement in council law. A pause. I will expect you to receive proper magical instruction. The raw power you carry without training it is not safe. I know, Harry said. I agree. There may be things I can teach you, she said, carefully. Foundational work. Nothing specific to Veela magic, but foundational magical theory, control techniques that predate wand work. The kind that would have been taught to an Evans child in the 8th century, if the tradition hadn't been broken. She looked at him. I am not offering this from sentiment. I am offering it because it needs to be done, and I am one of perhaps 4 people in the world currently equipped to do it. All right, Harry said. She looked at him like she'd been expecting more negotiation. All right, she repeated. You know what you're doing, he said. You care about doing it correctly. And you've already shown me that you'd rather be accurate than comfortable. He looked at her steadily. I can work with that. She studied him for a long moment with those river stone eyes, and something moved in them, not warm exactly. Severin was not a warm person, but the thing that is shaped like warmth when it appears in the kind of person who expresses caring through precision and attention. Recognition, maybe. Two people who speak the same language, who have found that out in the particular way of people who have been talking in it at each other without entirely realizing. "Come inside after breakfast," she said. "I want to show you something." She collected her tea and went, and Harry sat in the garden for a moment longer, looking at the apple tree and the green fruit and the mountains beyond, and felt the morning settle around him like something that fit. Fleur appeared around the corner of the building exactly where Gabrielle usually appeared, which was briefly confusing before he registered that she was taller and moving with a deliberateness that was entirely her own. "Well," she said. "She's going to teach me," Harry said. Fleur sat beside him on the wall. She looked at the space where Severin had been, at the faint impression of that conversation still in the air. "She told you about Thomas," she said. "You knew?" "Maman told me when I was old enough to understand it," Fleur said. She said it was important to know why Severin was the way she was. That it was not cruelty, it was scar tissue. She paused. She said most authority that behaves badly is scar tissue, underneath. "Your mother is very wise," Harry said. "She will be extremely insufferable if you tell her that. I'll keep it to myself." Fleur's mouth curved, not the almost laugh, an actual small smile, genuine and brief. He filed it away on the shelf where he kept the things that mattered, in the place that was filling up faster than any place in his life had filled before. After breakfast, which featured Gabrielle attempting to explain to Sylvie why foxes were probably magical and Sylvie attempting to apply academic rigor to this hypothesis, a combination that produced spirited results, Severin led Harry to a part of the sanctuary he hadn't been to yet. The northernmost building, smaller than the others, whose door had a ward on it that Harry felt when they crossed the threshold, a pressure, then a recognition, then the pressure easing, like a door that decides you're allowed. Inside was a single room, and the room contained a stone table, a set of objects on a shelf whose nature he couldn't immediately categorize, and the ley line. Here, the line was visible. No peripheral vision trick, it ran through the center of the room at floor level, a band of living light 6 inches wide that pulsed with a slow, even rhythm, and the room was warm because of it, and the air had that quality he'd felt that first night, complex and old, like the inside of something that had been doing its work for a very long time. Harry stood at the threshold and looked at it. "Come in," Severin said. "It already knows you. The ward deferred to you immediately, which, yes. Don't think about that yet." He came in. The light in the floor noticed him in the way things without eyes notice you, a slight brightening, a warmth that moved toward his feet. He looked down at it. "Don't respond yet," Severin said. "Just stand near it. Let it become familiar." He stood near it. The warmth moved up from the floor through his feet in that same way, reaching, but slower this morning, gentler, not the midnight urgency of a ley line shift but something more like calibration. Getting his measure. "What is it actually?" Harry said. "Not the official explanation." "What is it?" Severin looked at the line. "The closest I have is, it is a place where the oldest layer of magic is close to the surface. Like a vein of something. In some places the old magic is deep, hundreds of feet under, insulated by centuries of newer layers. In places like this it is," she gestured, "almost at the surface. Accessible. Responsive." She paused. "The Veela built here because it responds to our magic. Because proximity to the old layer strengthens us. We have a natural resonance with it. It is why we are what we are." "And me?" "You are the same resonance," she said, without apparent emotion, just the fact. The Lumière Ancienne lineage was, the human version of the same thing. People who naturally resonated with the old magic. Who could feel it and work with it without the intermediary of wands or formal spell work. She looked at him. The Veela and that lineage were natural allies. In the 8th century, before the separation of magical communities, before the statute, they shared this territory. They understood each other's magic because it came from the same source. And then? And then history, she said dryly. Wars. The statute. The Evans line retreated into Muggle life and the connection was lost, or thought to be. 500 years of dormancy. She looked at him with those steady eyes. And then you. Harry looked at the ley line. The gold and the flame last night. His magic reaching toward the current in the floor at midnight like it had always known the way. 500 years, he said. That's a long dormancy. Magic is patient, Severin said. Now. I want to see what happens if you extend a working toward the line. Not trying to access it or manipulate it. Just, presence. The way you held still in the trial. Be present toward it. He looked at the line. He thought about presence, about the quality of attention that is not doing but is fully engaged, the way you can look at a fire without trying to change it and still be entirely with it. Something happened. The line brightened. Not explosively, smoothly, the pulse slowing slightly and deepening, like a heartbeat settling. The warmth in his feet spread to his ankles, his knees, upward, and it brought with it something he hadn't expected, information. Not words, not images, more like texture. The sense of the land above and below him, the roots of the pines to the west, the cold water table deep underneath the stone, the shape of the hills and the direction of the wind and how the weather was moving across the mountains 2 miles north. He stood very still. What do you feel? Severin said, and her voice was different, not the council voice, not the authority voice. Curious. Genuinely, unguardedly curious. The land, he said. I can feel the land. She was silent for a moment. The old practitioners, she said, carefully. The scholars who wrote the 8th century records. They described this ability in the Lumière Ancienne lineage. They called it, she paused, something that translates roughly to deep sight. Not vision. Felt knowledge. The ability to be aware of the natural world at a level below ordinary perception. A pause. We thought it was lost. It's not lost, Harry said. It's just been waiting. He came back from the perception gently, the way you surface from deep water without rushing, the land awareness fading to background, his own edges coming back clear. The ley line settled to its regular pulse. He looked at Severin. She was watching him with an expression that had no performance in it at all, the expression of someone confronting something that has rearranged their understanding of a situation they thought they had mapped. Right, she said, quietly. Right. A pause. We have work to do. The morning session lasted 2 hours. Severin did not try to teach him spells or direct working, instead she gave him exercises in what she called attunement, which were less about doing things and more about the quality of awareness he brought to his own magic. Being able to feel its edges. Being able to know where it was in him and in what state. She was an extraordinary teacher, precise, patient in the specific way of someone for whom patience is a chosen discipline rather than a natural gift, which made it more impressive. She corrected him without contempt and acknowledged progress without enthusiasm, and both of these things were exactly what he needed and she seemed to know it. At one point she said, in the middle of an exercise, "You are not going to develop normally as a wizard." "All right," Harry said. "The normal wizarding education, Hogwarts, wand-based spell work, the categories of transfiguration and charms and so on, it will be available to you and it will be useful. But it will be secondary. A secondary language. The primary thing you are is older than all of that. Will that be a problem at Hogwarts?" Severin considered. "It will be noticed," she said. "By some people. The ones who understand enough to recognize what they're seeing." She paused. "There is a professor currently at that school, Dumbledore, who will understand it immediately. He is a very powerful wizard and he is also very political and his politics are," she stopped. I am perhaps not the right person to characterize them. I have a bias. What kind of bias? I believe he makes large decisions for other people without sufficient consultation. She said it with the precision of a considered opinion rather than personal animosity. It is possible that he has reasons. I do not doubt his intentions. I doubt his method. My parents, Harry said. Did he know them? Yes, Severin said. He was there. She paused again. Their protector, in a sense. During the war. Harry looked at her. What war? Severin looked back at him with an expression that was recalculating something rapidly. The Wizarding War, she said slowly. The one in which your parents died. My parents were in a war, Harry said. Harry, tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down on the edge of the stone table. 11 years ago, she said, there was a dark wizard of significant power. His name, his chosen name, was Voldemort. He pursued a philosophy of blood purity, the notion that magic should belong only to those of purely wizarding heritage. He and his followers killed and terrorized the wizarding world for approximately a decade. She watched his face. Your mother and father opposed him. Actively, as members of a resistance organization. A pause. When you were 1 year old, Voldemort came to your family home and killed your parents. He then attempted to kill you. She looked at him steadily. The killing curse, the worst kind of dark magic, the kind designed to end life absolutely, reflected off you. Voldemort was destroyed. Or dispersed. Something. The exact nature of what happened to him is unclear even to people who have studied it for 10 years. Harry sat with this for a long, complete moment. The scar, he said. He touched his forehead automatically. The lightning bolt shape, always there, present since before memory. Yes, Severin said. That's where it hit. Yes. And it bounced off me. Yes. He processed this the way he processed large true things, carefully, fully, without rushing. He laid it out flat in his mind and looked at the shape of it. His parents, who had not died in a car accident. A war. A dark wizard with a philosophy of blood purity who killed his parents and tried to kill him and failed, because of something in him, something in his 1-year-old self that the killing curse could not get purchase on. The Lumière Ancienne. The oldest layer of magic. The thing that the ley line recognized. The thing that was not a layer added on top but the foundation underneath. He couldn't kill me because of what I carry, Harry said. That is, Severin said carefully, one theory. The one I find most credible. Not love, Harry said. Not, I keep having this image of people saying it was because my mother loved me. And love is important, but love is not a shield against dark magic. Love is not a magical force in the conventional sense, no, Severin said. But the Lumière Ancienne lineage, the quality your mother carried and passed to you, is by its nature resonant with life. With the living world. With the deep current of the ley lines and the land and the oldest magic, which is, at its core, a force of continuation rather than ending. The killing curse is the opposite of all of that. She paused. When it met what you carry, it met its own negation. Harry thought about the flame in his palm last night. Silver white from the bond. Gold from something else, something deeper, the color of the ley line. Where is he now? Harry said. Voldemort. Unknown, Severin said. Dispersed, gone, diminished. The magical community has spent a decade debating this. Most people believe he is truly destroyed. Some do not. She looked at him. I am in the second category. Why? Because the magic that animated him was not ordinary dark magic. It was very old, very deliberate, and had been reinforced over many years with practices I will not describe in detail. That kind of working does not simply end. She held his gaze. But it is also not your problem to carry right now. You are 9 years old. You need to learn to control what you have before you spend energy on what may or may not be coming. Right, Harry said. She stood. That is enough for today, she said. Not because you cannot handle more, because good foundations require time to settle. He stood too, and they looked at each other in the room with the ley line running between them, and Severin looked at him the way she had in the council hall when she'd asked, "What are you, Harry Potter?" But the question had an answer now, or the beginning of one, and the looking had a different quality. Not solved, not comfortable, but honest. "Thank you," he said. "For telling me the truth." "I told you because you deserved it," she said. "Not as kindness. As a baseline courtesy that should have been extended to you years ago by people with far more obligation than I have." Harry looked at her. "Same thing," he said. "Slightly." She made a sound that was not quite anything but was the closest he'd gotten to Severin making a sound that was about genuine, private amusement. She turned and led him out of the room, and behind them the ley line ran its ancient course through the old stone, gold and silver, steady as breathing. Fleur was waiting outside. She had a book and an expression that had been performing patience for about 20 minutes, judging by its slight fraying. "Well?" she said. Harry looked at her. He knew, from the bond, that she already knew the broad shape of his mourning, not the specifics, but the quality of it. That it had been significant. That he had sat with large things and not been shaken by them. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "Let's walk." They walked west, toward the pines, and Harry told her about the ley line session and deep sight and the land sense and Severin's assessment of his lineage. He told her about Voldemort and his parents and the theory about the Lumière Ancienne and the killing curse meeting its own negation. He told it plainly, without drama, the way he was learning to say true things, fully, accurately, without making them larger or smaller than they were. Fleur walked beside him and listened in the full way she listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, genuinely receiving what was said. She asked 2 questions, one about the deep sight sensation, which she was curious about in a practical, interested way. And one about Severin's teaching methodology, because she wanted to know, she said, whether Severin was the right teacher for him or whether she was good at her discipline but potentially the wrong fit. "She's the right fit," Harry said. "She corrects without contempt." Fleur nodded once, accepting this. "Voldemort," she said, after a moment. Not a question, just the name, placed carefully, as though testing its weight. "Yeah. Your parents died opposing him." "Yeah. And he failed to kill you." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "You are taking this very calmly. Am I supposed to be falling apart?" She glanced at him. Most people would be. Most people didn't have the Dursleys to practice staying level on, he said, which was drier than he'd intended, but she received it in the spirit it was offered, the observation of someone who has had a lot of practice with large difficult facts and has learned the skill of inhabiting them without being flattened. "They should not have kept this from you," she said. "No. Dumbledore should not have placed you with people who," she stopped. "You said the word placed. That was deliberate." "He put me with them," Harry said. "Deliberately. After my parents died, someone decided I should live with Vernon Dursley." He said it with the flat quality of examining a fact he'd been avoiding examining. "That was a choice. Someone made it." Fleur walked in silence beside him for a moment. "You are going to have questions for him," she said. "When you are older." "Yeah," Harry said. "I am." They reached the tree line and stopped where the pines began, standing in the last strip of open ground before the old trees closed in, the ward somewhere ahead of them where the light changed quality. Behind them, the sanctuary. Ahead, the moorland and the mountains. "You should know something," Fleur said. He looked at her. She was looking at the mountains with the focused quality she had when she was about to say a true thing. "Last night, when you made the flame, the gold at the base. I recognized it because I have seen that color once before. She paused. When I was very small, before Gabrielle was born, I was in this room with Markellen and the ley line was active and she put my hands in the light. To introduce me to it. Because I am Veela and it is ours. She paused. The gold was there. Around my hands. The same color. Harry looked at her. You carry the same thing we carry, she said. A different lineage, a different history, a different expression. But the same source. She met his eyes. The bond didn't form between a Veela and a human. It formed between two people with the same relationship to the oldest magic. Just, one line kept the knowledge and one line lost it. Until now, Harry said. Until now, Fleur said. They stood in the morning with the mountains ahead of them and the sanctuary behind them, and the ley line running beneath their feet through the old stone, running as it had always run, through the centuries, through the dormancy, through 500 years of a line going quiet and waiting, patient as the magic itself. Through the bond, Harry felt Fleur's presence, the same warmth, the same certainty of someone in the next room. Except not the next room now. Standing here. The same distance from the old source as him. The same light, just shaped differently. The way the same river looks different from two different banks but is still the same water. Fleur, he said. The sanctuary found me, he said. Didn't it? I didn't walk through the ward by accident. The ward let me through. She was quiet for a moment. I think so, she said. I think it recognized you. I think the ward was built to exclude people who were outside the resonance, and you are inside the resonance. You were always inside it. The sanctuary simply found the door in you that was already there. Harry looked at the old pines. The roots lifted out of the ground in their arched tangles, the bark silver gray in the morning light, the needles moving slightly in a wind that was barely there. He thought about a 4-mile run through a highland storm. A light through the trees. A choice between going back and going forward that, looking at it now, had not really been a choice at all, had been a door already opening, a path already laid, a meeting that had been waiting for the right weather and the right bad night to assemble its pieces. Gabrielle's going to be insufferable about this, he said. When she's old enough to understand it. Fleur made the sound that was almost a laugh, and then today it went all the way, a real laugh, brief and bright and genuine, and she turned slightly away from him afterward the way people do when their own laughter surprises them and they need a moment with it. Extraordinarily insufferable, she agreed. They went back for lunch. Behind them, above the sanctuary, a kestrel hung on the thermal current that ran along the hillside, motionless in the air, watching the ground with the focused attention of something that has spotted its moment and knows the exact instant to fall. In the archive room, Elder Markellen sat with a cup of tea she had not yet drunk and the oldest record spread before her, and she looked at a passage she had read 40 years ago and understood in one way, and was now reading again and understanding in an entirely different way. The passage described the Lumière Ancienne lineage and the nature of the bonds they had historically formed with Veela, and it said, in the old formal script, these bonds, when they form, are not accidents of magic. They are corrections. Magic remembering what it intended, before the interruptions of human history. Markellen looked at this for a long time. Then she drank her tea. 111 years old, and magic could still surprise her. She considered this and found that she was, despite everything, deeply glad of it. Chapter 5, The Challenge. They arrived on a Wednesday. Harry knew something was wrong before he saw them, felt it through the bond, which had developed over the 3 weeks of his stay into something more specific than the general warmth of early days. He was in the middle of his morning session with Severin in the ley line room when the quality of the air in the sanctuary changed, and the change moved through the bond like a stone dropped in still water, the ripple reaching him a half-second before Severin looked up from the exercise she'd been directing. Her face went very still. "Stop," she said. He had been in the middle of an attunement exercise, learning to extend his deep sight without losing the thread of his own edges, the control problem that Severin described as the fundamental challenge of working with undifferentiated magic, staying yourself while being permeable to everything. He came back from it cleanly. He'd gotten faster at that. "What is it?" "Visitors," she said. The word had a specific texture. Not the texture of expected visitors. "Come." She moved to the door at a pace that was not quite urgent but was committed, and Harry followed, and when they came out into the main clearing he saw immediately what had changed the air. There were 8 of them standing at the ward boundary where the pines began. 8 women, none of whom were from the sanctuary, arranged in the kind of formation that is not accidental. Their clothing was darker than the sanctuary's people wore, not dramatically, just a shade, a degree of difference in the color choices that suggested a culture adjacent to this one but not the same. 5 of them were silver-haired. 2 were dark. The one at the center, oldest, with the specific quality of a person who expects the space around her to organize itself in her direction, had white hair so pure it was nearly luminous, and eyes that were darker than any Veela Harry had met in the sanctuary. More gray than silver. Cooler. The sanctuary's people were coming out of buildings and converging on the clearing with the quiet efficiency of a community that has protocols for situations like this. Apollon was already there, standing at the center of the cleared ground, and her posture had that quality Harry had seen once before, the night she'd walked back into the elders' meeting. Fully present, fully steady, and not pleased. The elders were filing out of the great hall. All 7 of them. Severin moved past Harry toward them without a word, and he stayed where he was and looked at the 8 women at the ward line and let his deep sight extend, gently, just to the edge of the cleared ground. The contact was immediate and informative. These women carried the same resonance as the sanctuary's people, the Veela quality, the relationship to the old magic, but expressed differently, shaped by a different landscape. Where the sanctuary felt like highland stone and deep lay water, these women felt like something more coastal. Colder. The deep sight didn't give him opinions but it gave him texture, and the texture was capable, organized, and not here by accident. Fleur appeared at his shoulder. He hadn't heard her coming. "The Roussard clan," she said, very quietly. "From the north coast of France. They have 2 sanctuaries of their own, one near Dunkirk, one in Brittany." She paused. "Their elder is Isabeau Roussard. She is 93 years old, she was on the Continental Council for 30 years, and she and Severin have not agreed on anything since 1961. What happened in 1961? No one tells that story in detail, Fleur said. The summary is that it involved a challenge, a treaty negotiation, and a significant amount of structural damage to a building in Lyon. She looked at the woman at the ward boundary. She is very powerful. More than Severin? Fleur considered this honestly. Different, she said. Severin is more precise. Isabeau Roussard is more, she paused, forceful. She commits fully. She does not work in half measures. What do they want? You, Fleur said. Almost certainly. Harry looked at her. Word travels, she said. In our communities it travels faster than you would think. An unbonded human child found in a sanctuary. A soul bond formed through ley line contact that survived a full council trial of severance. The great hall ceiling lighting up. She paused. Any one of those things would travel. All 3 together, she stopped. We had perhaps 2 more weeks before someone came to see for themselves. Harry looked back at the ward line. Isabeau Roussard had not moved, but her eyes had found him, with the precision of someone who already knew exactly where he was and had been watching him since she arrived. He met her gaze across the clearing. She looked at him the way chess players look at a piece whose value they have not yet determined, not dismissive, not impressed, taking a measure. He looked back and was still. Her expression shifted by a fraction. She turned to speak to the woman at her right. They haven't come through the ward, Harry said. They can't, Fleur said. They were not invited, and the ward excludes uninvited Veela as well as humans. Only our community's bond with this land and its ley line allows passage. A pause. And you? Apparently. They have to be let in. Yes. Or, she stopped. Or what? Or they can invoke the right of challenge, she said. Which is, under ancient Veela law, a clan with standing can formally challenge any decision or status of another clan's sanctuary. If the challenge is accepted or cannot be refused, the challenger is granted access and the right of formal contest. She paused. Rousard has standing. She has Continental Council authority. She cannot be refused. Markellen had come to stand near Harry, not next to him, but close, and he was aware of her presence the way he was aware of the ley line, as something old and significant operating in his vicinity. What would she be challenging? Harry said. Your status, Markellen said. She said it calmly. The recognition of the bond. Our council's decision to acknowledge you as a bonded guest of this sanctuary. She looked at the women at the ward line with the expression of someone who has seen this kind of thing a great many times and has opinions about it that she is currently not sharing. Isabeau believes, and she is not without precedent for the belief, that a soul bond between a Veela child and an untrained human of unverified lineage represents a threat to the integrity of both bloodlines. She will argue that our council acted precipitously. That the bond should be re-examined by a neutral authority. The Continental Council, Harry said. Yes. And if they agree with her? Then the bond's legal status as recognized under Veela law would be suspended pending their review, Markellen said. You would be removed from the sanctuary. The bond would remain, it cannot be severed, as we have established, but it would be legally unacknowledged. Unprotected. She paused. For Fleur, that would mean living with an active soul bond that her community's law refuses to recognize. The pressure of that, the disconnect between the magical reality and the legal reality, is not a trivial thing. Harry understood this immediately. He looked at Fleur. She was watching the ward line with her chin up and her jaw set and the expression she wore when she was managing something she was not going to allow to manage her. The challenge has to be formally issued and formally answered, Harry said. That's how it works. Yes, Markellen said. And under our law, a pause, very brief, when a challenge concerns a bond, the bonded parties have the right to answer it themselves. Before the elders respond. Fleur turned to look at Markellen. You are not suggesting, I am telling you what the law provides, Markellen said, with the serene authority of 111 years. What anyone chooses to do with that information is their own decision. Harry looked at the ward line. At Isabeau Rousard's cool grey eyes, still on him across the clearing with that chess player quality. At the 8 Rousard women arranged behind her like an argument already being made. He looked at Severin, who was standing with the other elders in a cluster that suggested rapid quiet consultation. Severin had her back to the ward line and was speaking in fast French, and whatever she was saying, 2 of the other elders were nodding and 1 was shaking her head. He looked at Apollon, who was watching him with an expression that had no instruction in it. She had been consistent in this, she did not tell him what to do in situations she believed he could navigate himself. It was one of the things about her he had come to actively respect. He looked at Fleur. Do you want me to answer it? He said. She looked at him. The bond between them was warm and steady and clear as the ley line on an active night. He wasn't asking for permission, he was asking whether this was what she wanted, which was a different question, and she knew the difference. Yes, she said simply. Harry walked toward the ward line. He heard Severin say his name behind him, sharp and concerned. He kept walking. Not fast, not slow, the pace of someone who knows where they're going and has no particular anxiety about arriving. He heard Apollon say something brief in French and Severin's response, and then quiet, which meant someone had decided to let him go. He crossed the cleared ground and stopped 5 feet from the ward boundary where Isabeau Rousard stood on the other side, and he looked at her from that distance, and she looked at him. Close up she was, not what he'd expected and also exactly what he'd expected. 93 years old and she looked 60, which was Veela metabolism at work, and she had the kind of face that had been beautiful in the conventional sense and had moved past it into something more interesting, the particular authority of a face that has stopped caring whether it's beautiful and has become powerful instead. Her eyes were that cool gray, and they were doing a great deal of precise work on him right now. "You are the child," she said. Her English was excellent. Slightly more formal than Severin's, shaped by more centuries of a different culture. "Harry Potter," he said. "Yes. You know why I am here. You want to challenge the bond's recognition. You think the Sanctuary's council acted without sufficient authority or deliberation." He paused. "I think you're wrong about the deliberation, and the authority question is more complicated than you're making it." Something moved in her eyes. Not the chess player quality now, something more active. "You are 9 years old. You're the second person to mention that this week," Harry said. "I haven't gotten younger in the interval." The woman to Isabeau's right made a small sound. Isabeau did not. "The right of challenge," Isabeau said, "is Continental Council law. It supersedes individual sanctuary decisions. You understand this?" "I understand that's the framework you're working in," Harry said. "I also understand that the challenge has to be answered before the elders respond. And that the bond gives me the right to answer it first." Isabeau looked at him for a full moment. "You are invoking the right of bonded answer." "If that's what it's called, yes." "Do you know what that means?" "Tell me," he said. "I'll tell you if it's accurate when you're done." She studied him. The chess player quality had gone, replaced by something that was, he thought, closer to genuine assessment, the kind that happens when someone has arrived expecting a certain kind of thing and found a different kind instead. "The right of bonded answer," she said carefully, "means that you speak for the bond in this challenge. Not the Sanctuary, not the Council, not a Fleur Delacour. You." A pause. "If your answer is found sufficient, the challenge is closed. If it is found insufficient, the challenge proceeds to the elders." "Found sufficient by whom?" "By me," she said. "As the challenging elder." Harry looked at her. "That seems like a system that can be abused." "Yes," she said, and something shifted in her face, a fraction of something that was almost appreciation. "Which is why it is very rarely invoked. The challenging elder's judgment is public record. If I dismiss a valid defense, that record stands." A pause. "I do not dismiss valid defenses." "All right," Harry said. "Then here is my answer." He took a breath. Not from nervousness, just to be sure of his footing, to feel the ground through his feet, the ley line far beneath but present, gold and steady. He felt Fleur behind him, through the bond. Felt her steadiness. The quality she had when she was watching him do something she has already decided he can do. "You came here because you heard that an untrained human child has a soul bond with a Veela of the Delacour bloodline," Harry said. "And because the bond survived a full trial of severance. And because the great hall ceiling lit up during that trial and showed the founding story with illumination that the elders here say they have not seen in decades." He kept his voice even, factual, the same quality he used with Severin's corrections. "Your concern is that an unverified human in a recognized bond with a Veela represents a threat to bloodline integrity and community law. That the bond was formed accidentally by an untrained child who stumbled through a ward and triggered a ley line, and that this is not a sufficient basis for legal recognition." Isabeau said nothing. She was listening. "The trial happened," Harry said. 7 elders, including Severin, who voted against my recognition, attempted the severance. 6 working jointly. The bond held. The ley line moved. The ceiling lit." He paused. I didn't fight the trial. I didn't resist it. I stood still and let it happen. What pushed back was not me, it was the bond itself, and underneath the bond, the resonance between my lineage and this place. He looked at her steadily. You are a Continental Council elder. You've read the old records. You know what Lumière Ancienne means. You know that the Evans lineage is in the Beaumont archive and what it says about them. He paused. You had that information before you came here. I'm guessing you've had it since yesterday morning, because that's when Severin's research request would have crossed the network, and that's the kind of thing you would track. Isabeau's eyes were very still. So the question you actually have, Harry said, is not whether the bond is valid. The magic already answered that question. The question is whether you trust the magic's answer, or whether you need a human political structure to ratify it. He looked at her. And I think you know what the answer to that is. I think you came here already knowing. I think you came to see whether the boy at the center of this was someone whose presence in a soul bond with a Veela child was something you could accept on behalf of your community. He paused. So ask me whatever it is you actually want to ask. The silence that followed had a remarkable quality. Not the silence of a challenge being weathered or a position being held. The silence of a thing completed, the silence that comes after the right words in the right order have been said and the air is absorbing them. Behind Harry, the sanctuary was very quiet. Isabeau Rousard looked at him for a long moment. Her face moved through something private and complex, not defeat, nothing like that, more the movement of someone updating a model they had arrived with. She looked at him the way Severin had looked at him in the ley line room, that first morning after the garden conversation. Like someone finding a shape in the evidence they hadn't put there. You said you had no formal magical training, she said. That's right. You worked that argument out from first principles. I worked it out from what I know about people, Harry said. Which I have had substantial practice with. A pause. How long have you been in the sanctuary, she said. 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, with no formal wizarding education, you have learned enough about Veela law to invoke the right of bonded answer. Fleur is an excellent teacher when she decides to explain something, Harry said. And Markellen told me what the law provides about 20 minutes ago. The woman to Isabeau's right made the small sound again. This time 2 others did as well. Isabeau's expression moved, and it moved, finally, into something that was not the chess player quality and not the assessment quality but was, unmistakably, though she would probably not have named it that, amusement. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it was gone, and her face was composed, and she looked at him with something that was not warmth but was respectful attention, which from Isabeau Rousard, Harry suspected, was the more meaningful currency. Your answer, she said formally, is sufficient. Harry nodded. The challenge is closed, she said, and there was a quality to the words, formal, deliberate, not reluctant. A judgment being entered into the record. The bond's recognition stands. She paused. I would like to speak with the council. Formally. Not as a challenge, as a consultation. That's not my call, Harry said. That's theirs. He turned and walked back across the clearing. Severin was waiting. Her face was, he had become, in 3 weeks, fairly good at reading Severin's face, which was a study in the management of strong feelings through precise control, and right now it was doing something he hadn't seen it do before. Something that was not quite pride and was not quite vindication and was approximately the shape that occupies the space between them. The right of bonded answer, she said, when he reached her. Where did you, Markellen, he said. Severin turned to look at Markellen, who was standing nearby with her hands folded and an expression of complete serenity. You coached him, Severin said. I told him what the law provides, Markellen said. He did the rest. Severin looked between them. Then she looked at Harry. The argument about the Continental Council needing to ratify what magic has already answered, she said. That was, you said the same thing in the trial, Harry said. More or less. You said you couldn't apply law to something the magic had already answered. I just applied it outward. Severin looked at him for a long moment. Right, she said. She seemed to be deciding something. We will need to let the Rouser delegation through for the consultation. She looked at the ward line, where Isabeau's group had not moved. I will handle the council preparation. You, she looked at him, stay visible. Do not hide. Rousard made a public judgment and she will want her delegation to see what she made it about. You want me to be seen. I want you to exist in your normal manner, Severin said, which was perhaps the most Severin way of saying yes that was physically possible. Which is, apparently, sufficient. She went to coordinate the council, and Harry turned to find Fleur directly behind him, close enough that he hadn't had to look far. She looked at him. He looked at her. I told you Severin would come around, she said. You said at first, Harry said. Yes, she said. At first. A beat. I was thinking of a longer timeline. They stood side by side while the ward came down by increments, the sanctuary's elders working the opening with the careful precision of people who were welcoming guests they were not entirely at ease with into a space they were completely at ease in. The Rouser delegation came through the ward line one by one, and the air of the sanctuary settled around each arrival, the way a body of water adjusts when stones are dropped into it. Isabeau Rousard was the last to come through. She stopped when she reached the cleared ground and turned slowly, taking in the sanctuary, the buildings, the fire pit, the kitchen garden, the great hall. Her expression was the focused, unhurried taking in of someone who is genuinely looking and has enough experience to know what she is looking at. Then her eyes came to Harry and she said, without preamble, your education will be a problem. I know, Harry said. Not because of capacity, she said. You have, more than sufficient capacity. The problem is that the wizarding world's formal education system will not know what to do with what you are. They will try to fit you into existing categories. Severin is working on foundational training, Harry said. Isabeau looked at Severin across the clearing. Something passed between them, not warmth, not antagonism, the specific quality of two people with a long history taking each other's current measure. Good, Isabeau said. The foundations matter more than anything a wand school teaches. She looked back at Harry. When you go to Hogwarts, and you will go, it will be useful regardless of its limitations, do not let them put a ceiling on you. The institutions are built for the average. You are not average. That's what Severin said, Harry said. Severin and I agree on perhaps 6 things in total, Isabeau said. This is one of them. A pause. That you exist, apparently, is becoming another. Harry looked at her steadily. Is that the closest thing to a compliment you give? Isabeau Rousard looked at him. And then, briefly, privately, entirely involuntarily, she smiled. It lasted about as long as Severin's amusement had lasted and left the same amount of trace. But it was real. Yes, she said. Largely. The afternoon turned into a formal council consultation in the Great Hall, the sanctuary's elders and the Rouser delegation around the long curved table, talking in a mix of French and English that Harry followed approximately 60% of, which was enough for the shape of it. The discussion was about the bond's continental implications, the legal record that Isabeau had created with her public judgment, the question of what protections and obligations that created going forward. Harry and Fleur sat along the wall with Gabrielle between them. Gabrielle had, through methods that remained unclear, acquired a piece of cake from the kitchen and was eating it with the placid concentration of someone attending an event they consider primarily entertainment. She accepted the argument because it was correct, Fleur said, quietly, watching the table. She accepted it because the magic already decided and she was honest enough to acknowledge that, Harry said. Same as Severin. Fleur glanced at him. You are developing a thesis about powerful people who follow evidence. I'm observing that the powerful people in this room are the ones who update when they're wrong. He paused. It seems relevant to pay attention to. Fleur was quiet for a moment, watching the table, where Isabeau and Severin were engaged in a technical discussion about continental registry protocols that appeared, against all probability, to be going reasonably. You are going to be very interesting at 17, she said. Not before. You are already interesting, she said, with the precise clarity of someone making a factual statement. I mean that at 17 you will be someone people underestimate at significant cost to themselves. Harry thought about that. Is that a warning? It is an observation, she said. I observe things. You said that before. It remains true. Gabrielle, without looking up from her cake, said, You are doing the thing where you talk in a way that sounds like two things at once. We are having a conversation, Fleur said. You are having two conversations, Gabrielle said. The one with words and the one that is not words. It is the bond thing. She considered her cake. I think it is nice. Like when Maman and Papa used to, she stopped. Looked at her cake with slightly more focus than the cake required. A small silence. Harry knew the shape of that silence. He'd heard it before in Fleur's voice when she talked about things that had edges she worked around carefully. He hadn't pushed on it, because he recognized the practice of keeping fragile things protected until you were ready to look at them directly. He looked at Gabrielle. She was 7 and she had silver eyes and she had given him half her breakfast on the first morning and drawn his portrait with enormous eyes and cracked glasses and presented it to him with modest pride. She was, in the 3 weeks he had been here, one of the primary reasons the sanctuary felt like it had. What was your father like? Harry said. Fleur went still for a moment. Not tense, still, the way she went still when a question arrived that she was deciding whether to take full in hand. Kind, Fleur said. He was very kind. He was a wizard, not Veela, and he loved Maman in the way some people love things they don't entirely understand, completely, without needing the understanding. She paused. He died 4 years ago. A magical accident. Nothing dramatic. Her voice was even. Nothing even interesting, which I think was the part Maman found hardest. He deserved a better story. He was funny, Gabrielle said, with certainty. He told funny stories. He called Fleur ma petite tempête. Fleur looked at Gabrielle. Something in her face moved, the practiced evenness giving way for a moment to something simpler and more painful and more real. She reached out and straightened a piece of Gabrielle's hair with a gesture that was automatic and careful and entirely unconscious. He did, she said. Harry looked at the table. At Apollon, who was watching the consultation with the focused attention of someone who has 3 separate concerns running simultaneously and is managing all of them. At the precise set of her jaw and the careful quality of her hands. At the shape of what loss looks like in someone who has had it long enough to build something solid on top of it without pretending the ground is flat. He thought about his own parents, which he was getting better at, the shelf not straining under the weight anymore, the photographs in his mind less painful in proportion to how much more he knew about who they had been. My mother was funny too, he said. Apparently. The photograph I have, she's laughing. I don't know what at. But whatever it was very funny. Fleur looked at him. I'm going to find out, he said. When I'm older. I'm going to talk to people who knew her and I'm going to get the full picture. Not the story the Dursleys gave me or the gaps around what Dumbledore decided I needed to know. The actual picture. Yes, Fleur said. You will. You'll help, he said. It was not a question, but he also was not assuming, it was the way he'd started saying certain things to her, the things that were true about the bond's future, not as certainties but as recognitions, as the kind of fact that you don't question when it feels right. Yes, she said again. Gabrielle had finished her cake and was leaning against Fleur's arm with the comfortable bonelessness of a child who has decided that the current arrangement is satisfactory and intends to remain in it indefinitely. Her eyes were moving toward the sleepy quality. The afternoon sun through the hall's narrow windows was warm and long. "You know what is strange?" Gabrielle said, in the unfocused voice of someone between awake and asleep. "When you first came, you looked like someone who had been told to be small. And then you stopped." Harry looked down at her. Her eyes were mostly closed. "When did I stop?" he said. "After the first morning," she said. "After the elders tried and couldn't. You stood differently after that." She was asleep in 30 seconds, breathing slow and even, completely trusting in the way only sleeping children are. Harry looked at the place where the ley line ran beneath the hall floor. The faint variation in the stone's color that he could see now without the peripheral trick, that had become as familiar as furniture. He thought about standing in the trial and feeling Severin's working reach for the bond and find no seam. The bond is not a layer added on top. It is part of the architecture. And if the bond was part of the architecture, and the bond was because of what he carried, and what he carried was the oldest layer of magic pressed close to the surface, then the bond was not a thing that had been done to him. It was a thing he had always been heading toward. The ley line had moved. The ward had opened. The sanctuary had found him. He had stopped being small. He wasn't sure exactly when. He thought maybe it had started before the trial, in the garden with Severin, when he'd said "I'm not going to be difficult, but I'm not going to shrink either," and meant it completely, and the meaning had surprised him a little with its completeness. 3 weeks of Severin's attunement work and Markellan's quiet observations and Fleur's honest company and Apollin's matter-of-fact care and Gabrielle's unconditional 6 in the morning acceptance, and the accumulation of all of it was that the shelf where he kept the story about himself was getting revised. Not demolished, not ignored. Revised. The way you revise a map when you find territory that wasn't on it. The consultation ended as the afternoon went long and golden. Isabeau Rousard took formal leave of the council with the particular courtesy of 2 institutions that have just established they can coexist without incident, which is its own kind of warmth even if it doesn't look like warmth. She stopped beside Harry on her way to the ward line. "The registry," she said. "When the bond is formally entered, and it will need to be, I will provide the continental certification. As the elder who issued the public judgment." She looked at him. "It is unusual. A human in the bonded registry. You will be the first." "That seems about right," Harry said. Her expression moved again, that brief, involuntary thing. "Yes," she said. "I imagine it does." She walked to the ward line and through it, her delegation behind her, the ward closing in their wake, and the sanctuary settled back into itself, not entirely the same sanctuary it had been that morning, something added to it, some layer of acknowledgement from outside. The bond's recognition spread wider now, anchored in the continental record. Severin came and stood beside Harry. They watched the ward line for a moment. "You knew she would close the challenge," Severin said. It was not an accusation. More, a question shaped like a statement. "I thought she would," Harry said. "She came here already knowing the archive record. She wasn't here to win an argument she already knew was lost. She was here to see what she was certifying." Severin was quiet for a moment. "You read people very well." "I had good teachers," Harry said. "Not formal ones." Severin looked at him with the expression he'd come to associate with her processing something she found both true and requiring more examination. "The Dursleys," she said. "Not on purpose," he said. "But yes." She was quiet for a long moment. "The foundational work you have been doing," she said. "The attunement. The deep sight exercises. I want to move to the next stage." "What's the next stage?" "Active working," she said. "Not the ley line, not yet, that requires more grounding first. But directed, intentional magic. Without a wand, through attunement rather than verbal formula. She paused. It will look, to anyone trained in conventional wizarding magic, like nothing they have a framework for. Is that a problem? At Hogwarts, in 2 years, it may confuse your professors, she said. Beyond that, no. It is not a problem. It is simply accurate. Harry thought about standing at the ward line with Isabeau Rousard and feeling the ley line beneath his feet, far below but present, gold and steady, the information moving up through the ground. Feeling certain. Not performing certainty, simply being in it, the way you are in it when the ground under you is real. All right, he said. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, she said. Bring the attunement to the session at the same depth you reached yesterday. The stone and root exercise. The one where you can feel individual root systems? Yes. She paused. You achieved that on the second attempt. It took me 6 weeks when I first learned it. She said it without particular emphasis, just, as she always did, accurately. Was that a compliment? Harry said. It was a fact, she said. Same thing, Harry said. Slightly. Severin looked at him. The managed expression, the controlled face, and underneath it, clearly, the thing that had been building since the first morning in the garden, when she'd told him about Thomas and he'd said it wasn't your fault, not entirely and meant it. The thing that was not warmth in the conventional sense but was the shape warmth makes in people for whom precision is the primary love language. She said, go eat something. You always forget to eat after morning sessions. I eat at lunch. Lunch is 4 hours after the session. You need something in between. He looked at her. Go, she said. He went. Behind him, Severin stood at the edge of the cleared ground and watched the ward line where the Rousard delegation had been, and she thought about a Continental Council judgment entered into the public record, and a boy who had answered a formal challenge with argument built from 3 weeks of observation and a question from Markellen and 20 minutes of thinking, and she thought about the archive record she had read last night, the passage Markellen had shown her, about bonds that were not accidents but corrections. She thought, I was the thing that needed correcting. She stood with that. Then she went inside. Chapter 6, What Remains. The last week arrived the way last weeks do, without announcement, in the quality of light rather than any spoken acknowledgement, the days taking on a specific weight that ordinary days don't carry. Harry noticed it first through the bond. Not in anything Fleur said or did, she was the same as she had always been, present and direct and managing nothing she didn't need to manage. But there was a quality to the connection that had been developing for the past few days, a kind of heightened attentiveness, the same way the ley line sometimes brightened slightly before a storm. Not distress. Something more like preparation. He was in the ley line room with Severin when he understood, properly, that he was leaving in 6 days. Severin was running him through the active working exercises. 3 weeks of attunement had moved, as she'd promised, into something more deliberate. She called it directed resonance, and the way it felt was like the difference between listening to music and playing it. The same fundamental relationship to the sound, but with intention added, with agency. He could move things now, not dramatically, not with the theatrical quality of wand magic he'd read about in books Sylvie had lent him, but with a precision that was, Severin had noted, unusual for someone who had been at it for 2 weeks. Again, she said. The stone in the corner. Not lifting it. Feeling its weight without touching it. Harry looked at the stone, a flat grey piece of granite the size of his fist. He extended the attunement to it the way he'd learned, not pushing, not reaching aggressively, more like extending awareness to include it. Feeling its mass. The specific cold density of granite. The way its weight sat against the floor. He felt the weight. Could have told her its dimensions to within an inch. Good, she said. Now tell me what's underneath it. He deepened the attunement, going past the stone's surface, and found a beetle moving in the stone's shadow. The faint trace of a crack running up through the granite's underside that wouldn't be visible from above. And below the floor, much further down, the ley line, always there, always that gold-silver presence, the constant the way north is constant on a compass. A beetle, he said. A crack in the stone's underside, roughly diagonal, about 2 inches long. And the ley line below. Deeper today, or I'm reading it at a different angle. Severin nodded. The atmospheric pressure changed this morning, she said. It affects the line's perceived depth. You are reading that accurately. She looked at him. You have been doing this for 2 weeks. It doesn't feel like 2 weeks, he said. No, she said. It feels like something you have always known how to do. She said it without drama. Because it is. You are not learning a new skill. You are recovering a dormant one. The difference in acquisition speed is significant. She sat on the edge of the stone table. She did that sometimes in the later sessions, when the formal posture of teaching had given way to something more like conversation. Harry had noticed this transition and valued it, though he didn't say so because Severin received appreciation best when it was implicit. When you go to Hogwarts, she said, the directed resonance will be incomprehensible to your professors. Not the results, the method. They will see you achieve outcomes and they will assume you have used the conventional mechanism. Unless something unusual happens, they will not look further. She looked at him. I am telling you this not to encourage concealment but to prepare you for the conversation you may eventually need to have about the difference. With Dumbledore, Harry said. Among others. Yes. You still don't trust him. I trust his intelligence and I am cautious about his tendency to place himself at the center of other people's narratives, she said carefully. He is a genuinely great wizard. He is also, in my experience, a man who believes that his understanding of a situation is more complete than other people's understanding of the same situation. A pause. Sometimes he is right. Sometimes the confidence is the problem. He put me with the Dursleys, Harry said. Yes. And I want to understand why, eventually. He looked at the ley line in the floor. Not now. But eventually. Eventually, Severin said, you will be in a strong enough position to have that conversation on your own terms. She looked at him steadily. I want you to understand something before you leave. About position and terms. He waited. You arrived here 3 weeks ago with no knowledge of your lineage, no formal magical training, no community, and no adequate framework for understanding what you are, she said. You are leaving with all of those things in initial form. The foundation. She paused. The work that remains, the Hogwarts education, the continued practice of what we have started, the questions about your parents and Voldemort and the people who made decisions about your life without consulting you, that work is yours to do. I am telling you that you are equipped to do it. Is this a pep talk? Harry said. It is a factual assessment, she said. You give very good factual assessments, he said. She looked at him with the managed expression. The thing underneath it. You are, possibly, the most frustrating student I have taught in 40 years, she said. Because? Because you never need to be told something twice, which leaves me with nothing to correct, and I am better at correcting than at, she stopped. At what? At this, she said, and it came out slightly more honestly than she'd intended. He could hear the edge of it, the crack in the precision where the actual feeling was showing. She looked at the ley line. I am better at correction than at whatever this is. Harry looked at her. It's the same thing, he said. Slightly. Severin looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the precision of someone choosing to put something into words that has existed without words until now, I would like to continue your instruction when you return next summer, if that is a possibility. Yes, Harry said. Definitely yes. She nodded once. Stood. Tomorrow we will work on the stone en route exercise at 3 times the current range, she said, and walked to the door, and paused. "You should eat something. It's 7 in the morning." "Then eat breakfast," she said, and left. Harry sat alone in the ley line room for a moment, with the ley line running beneath him and the early morning light coming through the narrow window and the warm weight in his chest that was the bond and the gold steady pulse in the floor that was everything below the bond, the thing the bond sat on, the foundation under the foundation. He was leaving in 6 days. He looked at the ley line. It pulsed at him gently, the way it did when he was in the room and not actively working, a recognition, easy and unconcerned, the way a place acknowledges someone who belongs there. He got up and went to breakfast. Gabrielle knew he was leaving before he told her. She appeared at his shoulder during lunch 3 days before with an expression of settled grief that was somehow, on a 7-year-old's face, more dignified than theatrical. She sat beside him and ate her soup with a focused purposefulness that he recognized. She got it from Fleur, and didn't say anything for a while. "I know," Harry said. "I didn't say anything," Gabrielle said. "I know," he said again. She stirred her soup. "Will you come back?" "Next summer," he said. "Definitely." "What if the Dursleys, Apollon has arranged things," Harry said. "They won't stop me." He paused. "She was very clear with them. I'm told." He hadn't been present for the conversation. Apollon had made the contact herself, through a channel he didn't fully understand, and had reported back with the specific composed quality of someone who has said exactly what needed saying to exactly the people who needed to hear it, and has not enjoyed the process but has no doubts about its necessity. What had been communicated, in general terms, Harry would return to the Dursley household until his Hogwarts letter arrived, at which point the arrangements would be formalized further. In the meantime, his whereabouts and well-being were of interest to people the Dursleys would find it inadvisable to ignore. Harry thought about Vernon's face during a version of that conversation. It wasn't entirely without satisfaction. "Maman cried," Gabrielle said. "After she talked to them. Not because of them. Because of you." Harry looked at her. "She went outside," Gabrielle said. "By the apple tree. I saw her. She thought no one was watching. She stirred her soup. She does that when she is sad and does not want to be seen being sad." Harry looked across the hall to where Apollon was sitting with 2 of the elders, engaged in a conversation whose administrative quality suggested legal paperwork. She was composed, focused, entirely present. Doing what she always did, functioning with competence at the front and processing whatever was necessary at the back. He thought about her hand on the side of his face, the first morning. "Are you all right?" The way the question had sat in him in the slightly awkward way of something finding space where space wasn't usually made. He got up, excused himself from Gabrielle, and walked across the hall. Apollon looked up when he stopped beside her. The elders paused their conversation. He said, to Apollon directly, "Can I talk to you?" She looked at him for a moment, reading the quality of the request. "Of course," she said. They went outside, around the corner of the hall to the kitchen garden, the same wall he'd sat on that first morning with Severin and the apple tree. The apples were riper now, past 3 weeks, they'd turned from green to a deep yellow-red, some of them ready, the tree heavy with the end of the season. He sat on the wall. She stood, facing him. He said, "Thank you." She looked at him. "For the hand on the face thing," he said. "The first morning. For are you all right without making it more than it needed to be? For the guardianship arrangement, which I know is a significant thing and I know you didn't choose it in advance." He paused. For saying that what happened in that house was going to stop, and meaning it without hedging it. Apollon was very still. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I noticed. That it matters." She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was doing the thing it did when she wasn't managing the feeling, the lit quality, the not quite blue eyes, the expression that was working through something large and private. She sat on the wall beside him. "You are 9 years old," she said. "Third person to say that," he said. "This week." She made a small sound. "I am going to say something to you," she said. "And I want you to receive it as I mean it and not as something else." "All right." "You are," she said, carefully and completely, "the easiest person I have ever extended care to. Not because you are uncomplicated, you are not remotely uncomplicated. Because you receive it honestly. You do not deflect it or diminish it or perform gratitude that is larger than what you feel. You simply," she paused, "you take it in. Accurately. And then you give what is accurate back." She looked at the apple tree. Most people who have been starved of something take it in a way that is frantic, or disbelieving, or they push it away because the receiving is painful. A pause. "You don't do any of those things." "I've had practice," he said. "I know," she said. "That is exactly what I mean." She turned to look at him. "I want you to know that whatever the legal framing of the guardianship arrangement, the actual content of it is not an obligation. It is not a technicality. I chose it." She held his gaze. "You are not a problem I am managing. You are," she stopped. Something in her face moved. "You are someone I am choosing to know. For your own sake." Harry sat with this. Not managing it, the way she'd said, taking it in. Letting it be the size it was. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated, with a faint note that was almost something lighter. They sat for a moment in the kitchen garden with the ripe apples and the old stone wall and the mountains in the distance, and it was the same quality as the silence he and Fleur had when neither of them needed to fill it. Something passed between them that was not the bond, was simply human, or human adjacent, the specific warmth of two people who have decided to be honest with each other and found the decision comfortable. "She is going to miss you," Apollon said. "Fleur. She will not say so in those words because she says the true thing," Harry said. "And the true thing might not be miss. Not yet." He paused. "I'll miss her too. In whatever the accurate way to say it is." Apollon looked at him. "The bond will be manageable over the distance. For the remaining time before Hogwarts. Not comfortable, but manageable. Severin's foundational work has helped stabilize it." She paused. "I want you to know that if it becomes not manageable, if you feel the pressure she described, if it becomes something affecting your daily, I'll write," he said. "Yes," she said. "You will write. And I will respond, and Fleur will respond, and Gabrielle will respond in a way that requires translation because her written French at speed is its own dialect." She said this with the dry precision of a woman who has been reading her daughter's written communications for 7 years. Harry smiled. A real one, without monitoring it. Apollon looked at his face and her expression did the thing that meant she was updating something. "There it is," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "What?" "Nothing," she said. "Only that I've been waiting to see you do that without something behind it." He didn't have an answer for that, but he didn't need one, and they went back inside when Gabrielle appeared around the corner with the expression of someone who has decided that the conversation has had adequate time and wishes to rejoin it. The last formal session with Severin was the morning of the day before he left. She worked him hard, not cruel, just thorough, running him through the full progression of the attunement work, the deep sight exercises, the directed resonance at its current maximum range. Testing, he understood. Establishing his final position accurately so the distance between now and next summer could be properly mapped. At the end of it, she produced a notebook from the shelf. Small, leather-bound, very old. She held it out to him. "These are my field notes from the foundational work," she said. "Not the full curriculum, enough for daily practice. The exercises we have established. The landmarks to look for. The warning signs that indicate you are extending beyond sustainable range." She paused. Do not extend beyond sustainable range. He took the notebook. You're giving me your notes. I have the originals, she said. These are a copy I made this week. A pause. Do not lose it. I won't. She looked at him. The morning light from the narrow window was doing something particular to the ley line. It was active today, not dramatically, but present, the gold in the stone warmer than usual. He felt it in his feet. You said the right thing to Rousard, she said. About the magic's answer not needing political ratification. You said the same thing first, he said. About law and what magic has already answered. I was talking about our bond law and your specific situation, she said. The principle is the same, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. It is. The principle is the same. She looked at the ley line. When you go to Hogwarts and you encounter people who try to define the limits of what you are, and they will, because that is what institutions do, they define and categorize, remember that the ley line is older than any category. What you carry predates the argument about what it is. That's the most philosophical thing you've said to me, Harry said. I am in an uncharacteristically philosophical mood, she said. Do not get used to it. I won't, he said. I'll just remember it accurately. She looked at him. The managed expression. The thing underneath. Not hidden anymore, not really, it had been visible for a while now, the thing that was Severin's version of warmth, expressed in precise attention and honest correction and the giving of field notes in a leather notebook and the insistence that he eat between sessions. Next summer, she said. Next summer, he said. She nodded. Go. You should spend your last day with Fleur, not in here with me. He went. He found Fleur not in the garden, not by the fire pit, but up on the hillside above the sanctuary, sitting in the heather where the trees gave way to open moorland, looking at the mountains. He'd found her there once before, early in the second week, a morning when the weather had cleared after 3 days of rain and the mountains had that specific hard-edged clarity that only came after weather. She'd been reading. This time she wasn't. She was just sitting, and the quality of her sitting was the same as her listening quality, fully present with whatever was in front of her. He sat beside her. The heather was late summer, the purple going brown at the edges, and the wind was present but not cold, and the mountains were doing the thing they did when the visibility was perfect, appearing closer than they were, the ridgelines clean and detailed against the sky. I know, Fleur said, before he said anything. I know you know, he said. They sat. The bond will hold over distance, she said, after a while. Severin showed me the stabilization work. It will be, she paused, choosing the word honestly, insufficient. As a substitute. But present. Better than nothing. Considerably. He looked at the mountains. He'd been looking at them for 5 weeks now, every clear day, and they were different from how they'd been the first time he'd seen them, familiar, the specific shapes of the ridgelines embedded now, the way places get into you when you've spent long enough with them. The highest peak to the northwest had a notch in the ridge that caught the evening light in a way he'd been watching develop as the season changed and the angle of the sun dropped. I want to tell you something, he said. You keep saying that and then telling me significant things, she said. I am beginning to anticipate these openings. Yeah, he said. This is significant. She turned to look at him. He looked at the mountains for one more moment and then turned to look at her. Before I came here, he said, I knew I was nothing. Not as a feeling, I mean as the operating assumption of my life. The basic working fact. I took up the wrong kind of space, I was the wrong kind of person, and the evidence for this was consistent and comprehensive enough that I'd stopped arguing with it. He paused. I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't devastated. I'd accepted it as the ground I was standing on. Fleur was watching him without moving. The bond surviving the trial wasn't what changed it, he said. Or not only that. It was, he paused, finding the specific thing. It was every time someone here said a true thing to me. Severin saying the foundational work and the fact that it was recovering something dormant rather than learning something new. Your mother saying I am choosing to know you for your own sake. Markellen touching my chest and looking at me like she'd found something. And you. He looked at her. You told me I had an honest face for someone who had learned not to be seen. You didn't say it to make me feel better. You said it because it was accurate. Fleur held his gaze steadily. It was accurate, she said. I know. That's why it worked. He paused. The ground is different now. Underneath me. It's not the same ground and I can't put the old ground back if I wanted to, which I don't. He looked at her directly. I wanted to tell you that. Because it happened here. Because it happened with you. The wind moved through the heather around them. Somewhere below, in the sanctuary, Gabrielle was almost certainly involved in something that someone would need to explain to someone else later. Fleur turned to look at the mountains. Her face was doing the internal work again, the deep consideration, the honest evaluation. When you arrived, she said, I had agreed with the situation. The bond, your presence. I had agreed with it because it was true and arguing with true things is pointless. She paused. I want to distinguish that from having chosen it. Yes, he said. At some point in the second week, she stopped. The morning Severin came out of the archive. When she told you about Thomas and you said it wasn't entirely her fault. I was watching from the doorway. She paused. That was when I stopped agreeing with the situation and started choosing it. Harry looked at her. I want you to know the difference, she said. The distinction matters to me. I know it does, he said. I know the difference. She turned and met his eyes, and the quality of the look was one he'd seen before from her, the direct, unguarded, nothing held back quality she had when she said true things that cost her something. The look that was choosing. Write to me, she said. Not summaries. Full letters. You'll write back. Extensively, she said. And critically. If you write something imprecise I will tell you. I'm counting on it, he said. And when you go to Hogwarts, she paused, you will encounter people who have heard of you. Your name is known in the wizarding world. The boy who survived. People will have, she made a small gesture that dismissed a great many things efficiently, opinions. I don't care about the opinions, Harry said. I know, she said. I just want you to be prepared for the opinions to be loud. I'll manage. You will do considerably more than manage, she said, with the precision of someone making a prediction based on evidence. They sat on the hillside until the light started to change, not long, not forever, just the right amount of time for the mountains to go from midday clear to afternoon gold, and then they went back down together through the heather, not talking, the bond between them warm and present and easy the way things are easy when they have been tested from every angle and held. The last evening was dinner with the whole community, which was Gabrielle's doing. She had apparently lobbied for it with the specific tenacity of a 7-year-old who has identified a desirable outcome and is prepared to pursue it through any necessary channel. The long table had all its leaves in and every chair occupied, and the noise was substantial and warm and had the quality of a send-off that was not trying to be sad. Markellen sat near Harry at dinner. She did not say much, she rarely did, in social settings, as though she was conserving something for contexts where her words carried more specific weight. But at one point she put a hand over his briefly and said, very quietly, you will come back changed and remain yourself. That is the correct proportion. He looked at her. It is harder than it sounds, she said. Most people do one or the other. All change, no self. All self, no change. She looked at him with the winter water eyes. You have the proportion right. I thought you should know. How do you know? He said. I am 111 years old, she said. I know. He didn't argue with that. Sylvie gave him a list of magical theory texts she considered foundational. It was 6 pages, densely written, annotated in 3 colors. He accepted it gravely and she looked slightly less academic than usual for approximately 4 seconds. Genevieve pressed a small jar of the salve she'd used on his eye into his hands without comment. The auburn-haired girl, Vivian, came and stood in front of him with the particular boldness of a 14-year-old who has decided to do a thing and is going to do it regardless of awkwardness. "You're going to be someone important," she said. "People keep saying that," Harry said. "We keep being right," she said, and walked away. Gabrielle fell asleep against his arm at the table before the meal was even finished, which was simultaneously inconvenient and exactly right, and he sat with her weight against him and the noise of the community around him and looked down the table at Apollon, who met his eyes and made no particular expression but held the look for a moment, which said what it needed to say. He carried Gabrielle to bed, which she did not wake for but which she registered in some sleeping way, her hand gripping his sleeve briefly before she let go. He set her down on her bed and straightened her blanket and she said, without opening her eyes, "Next summer." "Next summer," he said. "Bring something from London," she said. "Like what?" "Something interesting," she said. "You decide." "Okay," he said. She slept. He stood in her doorway for a moment, in the warm small room with the sleeping child and the Highland dark outside the window, and felt the bond in his chest and the ley line far beneath and the 5 weeks of the sanctuary in every layer of him, in the field notes in the leather notebook, in the specific vocabulary of attunement that Severin had given him, in the revision of the story he told himself about who he was, in the particular weight of being known. He went to bed. He did not sleep immediately, lay on his back in the guest room and looked at the ceiling, the old beams, the carved wood at the corners that he'd come to recognize as decorative versions of the same interlocking patterns in the great hall. Small echoes of the founding story, distributed throughout the sanctuary, so that the history was present in every room you stood in. You could not be here without being inside the story. He thought, I am inside the story. Not a story that had been told about him, a boy who lived, a deadly inconvenience, a blank space where a person should have been. His own story. The one he was in the process of writing, with the 5 weeks of this place as the first pages. He slept. The morning came grey and soft, not raining but close, the light the color of pewter and the air with the particular quality of September arriving to remind August it was done. His bag was packed, the field notebook, Sylvie's list, Genevieve's salve, the drawing Gabrielle had made him, the 3 books he'd borrowed and hadn't finished, the clean clothes from the village boy who was near his size. He ate breakfast with Gabrielle, who had recovered from last night with the complete resilience of the very young and was eating porridge with the focus of someone who had decided to treat the day normally because treating it as special was too much work. It was, Harry thought, exactly the right approach. He ate his porridge and they talked about the fox that she had still, over the entire summer, not managed to find, and whether this indicated the fox did not want to be found or simply had not had occasion to be findable. Both, Harry said. You think there are things that exist and do not want to be found? Gabrielle said. I think there are things that exist on their own terms whether you find them or not, Harry said. The finding is for you, not for them. Gabrielle considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Like the sanctuary, she said. It exists whether humans know about it. Exactly like the sanctuary. She ate her porridge. But it found you, she said. It found me, he said. Which is different from me finding it. She looked at him with those silver-lit eyes. You will find the fox, she said. Next summer. I think the fox will want to be found by then. The walk to the ward boundary happened in the mid-morning, when the cloud was high enough to suggest the rain might hold off. The whole community did not come, that would have been too much, but those who were present were the right ones. Mark Helen, standing at the edge of the cleared ground with her hands folded. Severin, to her left, straight-backed, composed, watching the path with her river-stone eyes. Genevieve, who nodded once when Harry looked at her, which contained everything it needed to contain. Sylvie, who gave him an awkward wave that was more honest than it was graceful, and which he returned in kind. Apollon walked him to the ward line with Gabrielle on her other side. At the boundary she stopped and turned to face him, and she looked at him with all of it present, the guardianship and the choice and the apple tree grief that Gabrielle had seen, and she did not make it more than it was or less than it was. She put her hand briefly on his face again. The same gesture as the first morning. He held still under it, the same way. 6 days for the return journey, she said. You have the contact protocol. If anything, I'll use it, he said. Good. She dropped her hand. Next summer we will discuss the formal arrangements. With your Hogwarts enrollment there will be considerations. We will manage them. Okay, he said. She nodded once, the decisive kind, and stepped back. Gabrielle threw both arms around his waist with the complete commitment of someone who does not modulate physical affection based on audience. He hugged her back, which he had not, he realized, done the appropriate number of times over the summer. She squeezed once, hard, and let go, and stepped back beside her mother, and her face was doing the dignified grief expression again, the one that was too adult for a 7-year-old and that came from somewhere genuine and made it completely right. Next summer, she said. Next summer, he said. Something interesting from London. Something very interesting, she clarified. He turned. Fleur was standing at the ward boundary. She was wearing her outdoor coat, wool, pale grey, the collar up against the September air, and her hair was down, and she was looking at him with the direct, unguarded quality that she reserved for things that mattered. She had walked him to the ward line. This was, he understood, her version of the hug, present, chosen, fully committed without requiring explanation. They stood at the boundary. The ward was a slight pressure in the air, the place where the sanctuary's space ended and the world's space began. He could feel it as a shift in texture, the quality of the air inside and the quality of the air outside, different in ways he couldn't fully name but could definitely feel. Inside, the ley line, the deep resonance, the gold and silver quality of old magic close to the surface. Outside, the open moorland, the wide grey sky, the highlands going on in every direction, indifferent and enormous and not unfriendly. Full letters, Fleur said. Full letters, he said. Not summaries. Not summaries. A beat. You are going to be all right, she said. Not a question. Not a comfort offered to manage his feelings. A fact stated cleanly, the way she stated all facts. I know, he said. He crossed the ward line. The shift was immediate, not painful, not even sharp, more like the difference between a room where someone you know is present and a room where they've just stepped out. The bond didn't diminish but it changed character, became the someone in the next room quality again rather than the someone right beside you quality, and he stood in the heather on the other side of the ward and turned back. Fleur was standing at the boundary. The sanctuary behind her, the buildings and the fire pit and the kitchen garden and the great hall, the elders at the edge of the clearing, Apollon and Gabrielle. All of it contained, held, the ward invisible from outside but present, the way the ley line was present, below the surface, real. She looked at him across the boundary with those lit eyes, that particular clear look. He raised one hand. She raised hers. He turned and walked north into the moorland, toward the road, toward the Desleys' cottage that was 4 or 5 miles back and that he was returning to for 6 days and that was, diminished now. Not more frightening. Less significant. A thing he was moving through rather than a thing that contained him. The heather was late summer, purple-brown, and the wind came off the mountains cold and specific, the highlands reminding you personally that they had been here before your kind and would be here after. He walked through it and felt the bond behind him, warm and steady, the someone in the next room quality, not the presence of the last 5 weeks but the knowledge of it, the assurance that the room exists and the person in it is real. He put his hand briefly to his chest. The ley line was behind him, too far now to feel through his feet, but it was there. He knew it was there. It would be there when he came back, patient and gold and unconcerned with the calendar, deep in the stone where it had been since before the sanctuary was built, since before the elders' records began, since before the names for it existed. He was 9 years old, and he was small for his age, and his glasses were cracked on the right side, and he was walking back towards 6 days of Vernon Desley and then, after that, 2 years until a Hogwarts letter, and after the Hogwarts letter the formal wizarding world and everything it would try to do with him and everything he was now equipped to answer. He was 9 years old and the ground had changed beneath him. Not soft ground. Not easy ground. But real ground, the kind you can stand on properly, the kind that doesn't shift when you put your weight on it. The kind that has ley lines running through it, old and gold and deep, available to anyone with the heritage and the training and the honesty to stand still long enough to feel them. He walked. The moor went on around him, wide and grey and vast, and the mountains did their mountain thing in the distance, and the sky was the color of pewter and possibility. Behind him, the sanctuary held what it held. Ahead, the world was waiting to see what he was. It was going to find out.